Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Council Workshops Wednesday, the 20th of May. I am Councillor Young, and I am your chair today. We would please start with karakia. Whakataha te hau ki te uru, whakataha te hau ki te tonga, kia ma kina kina ki uta, kia ma tara tara ki tai, kia ki ana, te kura, te oka, e hau. T.A. Marae. Awesome. I would first like to welcome Brett to the table to talk about Whakamana Marae.
Thank you, Councillor Young, and thank you for having me today. This is, I think, a pretty cool thing to be talking about this afternoon. The Whakamana Marae Community Resilience Program. I think this aligns really nicely with some of our community outcomes, our partnership with Tangata Whenua, as well as some of our future fit and going for growth aspirations as a council. So we'll jump straight into it. I don't think this will take the full hour. The purpose of today is to provide you an overview of the ECA, which stands for Energy Efficiency Conservation Authority Community Resilience Program, and what it could mean for our Horowhenua community. We'll outline the proposed approach being explored by officers, including our marae and our community facility participation. We'll present the current funding model, the scope and the considerations, and highlight the resilience and emergency management and community wellbeing benefits of the program. The questions we're asking Council today is: do you support officers continue to progress with participation in the program? Do you support officers seeking external funding? And does Council support the signing of the ECA contract confirming its place in the scheme? We'll be working across all three aspects of the No See Do triangle. After today, you'll know about the program and what it entails. You'll see the opportunities and the benefits for the community, and we'll ask for some guidance on our approach and our way forward. So what is the Community Resilience Program? It's administered by ECA, and it supports solar panel installations, battery storage systems, and resilience upgrades at community facilities, and specifically marae. It's designed to improve resilience during emergency, so it has a strong link to our civil defence aspect. We all know that marae are often set up as evacuation points and the important role that they play in an emergency. It's designed to maintain community capability during outages and support communities impacted by weather events or power outages. Why this matters for HDC? It increases our resilience across our district. Obviously, it touched on it supports emergency response. It provides support for isolated community, stronger partnerships with marae and organisations. And it enables marae to be self-sufficient during those power outages because they'll be fully sustainable with the investment in the infrastructure. It aligns with our emergency management priorities, community resilience outcomes, partnership with Tangata Whenua, sustainability objectives, and our future fit thinking. So the funding model, the opportunity, I guess, for us if we look to move forward with the project. It's up to 75% funded by ECA, so that would be their contribution would be $462,000 of investment across in the Horowhenua across our marae and the identified sites. There is a co-funding contribution, which I'll talk to you a little bit later on. We're not here asking Council for money today. We've got some opportunities for external funding to try and offset that. The 25% co-funding required is approximately $115,000. And so that would allow a number of sites across the Horowhenua to be set up with full solar and battery and to be self-sustainable in an event. The important notes, and it's really important to note this now, that the co-funding doesn't need to be fully secured when we sign the contract with ECA. We can sign that and then signing it pretty much guarantees our place in the scheme, and then we work with them to get what funding we can. So we have been talking to different funders out there. We've got some opportunity, I think, with co-funding, and we'll touch on that shortly. So we're currently working very closely with ICA. We've done a number of assessments where in partnership with Electra, who have been going out and doing some assessments of some marae for us to understand what the requirements are for each site. They're assessing the infrastructure requirements, working through what's required for an install, and identifying the outcomes for each site. They've been really, really forthcoming and really great to work with. They've engaged with a number of our sites already, and really good for that technical advice. And Marae is also helping to secure some of the co-funding, and some are in a position where they're effectively all ready to go. So we've done assessments, as you can see there, at a number of marae. We're also exploring a few other sites, and you'll notice Tokomaru Hall and Shannon Memorial Hall, which are key strategic locations for us in the event of a civil defence emergency, for a wellbeing centre set up or evacuation point. I think with the funding that we get, we can take up to 7 in the first round, and there's opportunity in talking to ICA for further rounds of funding in the future. The marae that have been identified first and foremost are based on strategic locations, based on the need. So as I touched on the co-funding, we're in conversations with Te Puni Kukuri, our Lotteries and Department of Internal Affairs, and ECCT around what co-funding looks like. All the conversations that we've been involved with so to date have been positive. We haven't yet applied for any co-funding, however, we are hoping to start that process if we get the go-ahead to move ahead with the contract. So as detailed, organisations have indicated in principle support, funding discussions are ongoing, and there's no immediate requirement to get that 25% before we move ahead. You may have seen this project. It has been rolled out in a number of other locations, including in Kapiti. They've got 7 sites, and Manawatu, who have a few more sites, and that's still taking that maximum amount of funding to roll out as many sites as they can, because some will be different, some will be a little bit less, some will be more, based on the size of their roof and the requirements that ECAS and Electra are working through. So you may have already seen that. It's a project that's going right throughout the country in a number of sites. So it's important that we do, if we want to be involved in this, get our place in the scheme. So the things that we're currently working through is the final scope and the number of sites, what we can afford and what we can do. The technical feasibility at each location, so that's where we're leaning heavily on Electra. What pre-installation and upgrade requirements may be needed, the ongoing operational arrangements, and the big one there, I guess, is confirmation of co-funding support, and that's probably our next big thing that we need to focus on. And then from there, it will all go into a sort of project management and delivery of the project. At this stage, we're still in very much a planning and assessment phase, but we are looking to accelerate that to try and get some outcomes for our community if council agrees that's the right direction. So yeah, effectively, today we're asking you, do you support the program and support us to signing the contract and chasing additional funding to try and get this outcome for our community and a number of our sites in Marae across the Horowhenua. Anything you'd like to add, Aroha?
I think you covered it.
And that is short and sharp the presentation this afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you for your presentation. Apologies. I've just got apologies from Councillor Barker and Councillor Olsen. Can I please ask that they be accepted? Seconded. Thank you. First question I have is, what happens if co-funding can't be secured? Does the project scale back or stall?
we will scale it back to based on the number of sites we can deliver with the co-funding that is available. We are aware that some Marae have some co-funding that they can contribute as well for those sites for them. So we're effectively, I think, 2 are almost ready to go, and we'd be chasing the rest. Ideally, we'd like to secure all the co-funding before we roll ahead, but if we need to, we can do it case by case.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Thank you for that presentation. It sort of feels a little bit like the fire truck presentation with the hoses. Actually, good bit of number 8 solar thinking. Is there a limit on? I think, did you say 7, or is there that first question? Is there a limit? And in terms of co-funding, if a hall or Marae had some money that they wanted to put into it, they could do so. So it's not limited to just looking for external funding opportunities. And would I be right to think that this kind of has an added bonus in terms of resilience and financial resilience, that there would be less pressure on these Marae and community halls to find money for electricity each year? So.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mason. And yes, for each of the sites identified, if they're successful in co-funding and we get the initiative, the solar and the battery there, absolutely it will decrease the electricity bill to hopefully next to nothing for the year. The limit we talk about 7 sites, but I think it's a funding limit at this site at this early stage, so it's $462,000 from ECA. However, if there's the ability to stretch beyond 7, we absolutely will explore that. And there are conversations that we, that this could be another funding round in the future. So it's quite an exciting opportunity, I think.
I wonder if I could just build on that. At present, for example, we've got 2 solar farms being built in Foxton, and within both of those projects is the opportunity to partner with those companies who are really eager to support the Marae in Foxton to have solar installed. And so making sure that we're working with there's like lots of other opportunities that we want to include in this, so that we're looking at it collectively. And what that might mean is that if we secure funding from those companies, we can actually add to the list of Marae and add to the list of community halls or facilities.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points more than questions. Despite it being privately owned, would Oho Hall be considered later as an option? That was just a point. And the other question I had around for Motawiti and Paranui Marae, would the endowment fund be considered for getting their percentage? Because has funded upgrades to their kitchens and ablutions blocks in the past. So that was just my points.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. And in all honesty, I hadn't considered the endowment fund, but that's probably a conversation that we can have if that's appropriate. And then I guess our focus initially is on the first sort of lot, and then if there's future opportunities, obviously we want to stretch that as far as we could go in terms of community halls or other sites.
Hi. Hold up. The time frame. So, in terms of how long will this take to get off the ground, or you don't really know that yet?
It really depends on when we secure the co-funding. So once we get co-funding locked in, then it's effectively we can move into the delivery phase. So whether that's all the co-funding or part of it, ideally we'd like to do it as all, but I think we've got till 30 June 2027 to spend the money. So there is time, but we do need to move on it if we're going to be successful.
Is there an amount that, in terms of the co-funding, that each marae will have to put into that, or what's that amount? I'm
not sure the exact amount because each site might be a little bit different. So we haven't drilled down to the detail of the cost for each marae. The average cost of install that ECA fund is $66,000 per marae. But obviously some marae might need less, some might need more. So they've worked that out on an average cost. So I don't have the detail of that at this stage for each marae. We are in conversation with marae around co-funding opportunities and what that might look like.
I like the idea of maybe for the Te Awaho marae, Motuiti and Paranui, like Noah said, to be maybe using the endowment fund to support that, which makes or frees up the ability for other marae to be included in that, particularly in the Puku, which is the Shannon Foxton area, around that area. I just noticed that the marae Potupā wasn't on that list, but we have been contacted by Justin from Tumatakahuki, so we've agreed to that, but I haven't seen our name up there. Considering our marae is one of the marae that hosts the kingitanga.
Councillor, can I just keep you safe in this conversation? I think that a conversation about your marae we could have offline with you and marae representatives, and I want to keep you safe and make sure that we're not using you in an elected member role advocating for your marae.
Absolutely.
But we note your concerns and
Ka pai. Thank you, Monique. More questions? The other questions? Yeah, I support the idea of the endowment fund if we're able to support the other marae, to allow other marae in the rohe, particularly the puku, to take advantage of this awesome opportunity. Kia ora. Thank you, Monique, for that.
Just with the EEC funding, is that I'm just trying to figure out the selection criteria here. Is that more targeted towards marae, or is that the decision that we've taken over more community halls? No, it's more targeted toward marae. It's the fund is community resilience program, but it certainly has a marae lens to it, and community hall.
Sorry, if I can just add to that, it's also to go towards our marae's ability to stand up in the event of an emergency, and to provide our community with other avenues, and to be able to help us out in the event of an emergency when some people feel more comfortable going to marae, and so when they're there, they can help us out in that situation. That's a real benefit.
Two questions from me, please. Can you just give me a snapshot of the resource effort required internally? Like is this going to be a major work stream for us, or is this kind of just an add-on to some existing activities? Just give me a context of if we get involved in this, like how much effort's involved. And then I've got a second question if that's right. I'll follow up.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. And look, I think there will initially be it's essentially an add-on effectively, but there will be some resource to apply for some funding and involved in those conversations. But I wouldn't think it's significant. I guess what we're a little bit unsure of will be the project management and oversight of that, but we haven't sort of had the conversations further around that at this stage.
Two other questions then. How hard would it be to put together information that said, what if we did every single marae, every single rural hall? What does the profile look like, and what would the unfunded ECA portion be, just to give us context? Because I mean, I know council doesn't have spare money, but if we looked at it as we do it one time, like what does it look like? I'd be keen to understand what the size of that is, because I probably at the moment I haven't got really good idea of the quantum that could be in play. And then the third point was, have we turned our mind to, if we become the backstop for a lack of successful third-party co-fund, have we turned our mind to perhaps a 1-year reallocation of some of our grants funding? So I'm thinking rural halls, small capital, Burapa, there might be another one. Because I think collectively it might be like between 80 and 100 grand across those grant funding pools. And so if we said for 1 year only, in order to make this happen, we kind of shift the focus of those funds or pause them. Is that something we could turn our mind to, or is that too hard? That, but acknowledge you might need to go away and think about that.
I haven't thought of that in the detail. Monique may have some view.
Like we could do some work on that as an option. What I wonder though is whether that is a change to our community grants and funding policy and process that would have an interest which would trigger significance. So what I mean by that is if you think about those who rely on the community grants and funding process, by us saying we're not allocating money this year, we're not going to have that round and instead we're going to reallocate it. I'm not saying it is, I just want to caution you that we should just think about that. But we could go away and do some work on that if that's an option council would like us to consider. I think the spirit of this presentation was more, hey, we got some money. We don't think we're going to spend any council money, but if there is an appetite to spend some council money and do some other stuff, we can explore that. But I think even if you are keen for us to look at some optioneering around council contribution, other community halls, other marae, and what council funding could be allocated towards something, it'd be good for us to just get on with the money that's already available, because I wouldn't be surprised if in 12 months' time ECA turn around and give us another lot of money. So I'm keen for us to not utilise the money ECA are offering us right now.
Yeah, that's all good. I agree with that. I just would love to get a snapshot of like what are we potentially on the hook for, or what could we potentially make a really bold decision to just go hard, either phased or one. Like I just want to get a sense of it, but I don't want to overcook the process either. But equally, really acknowledging that we're kind of going into this with a little bit of blind faith in that you're saying we're not committing council money, but we will absolutely be the backstop for co-fund. And so, because if you don't get the I heard that there's rescaling of the thing, but equally, then you get I would want more information about that. Does it actually mean that we then adjust this side of the scope of the project down to 75% if there's zero co-funding?
If we don't get the co-funding, that list on the right-hand side, we won't touch. So I think the idea is we know what we could do with 462k. Me, Bernie and I had a conversation with a company, was it yesterday, that one of the solar farms in Foxton, and I'm pretty confident that we are going to get additional funding. But we'd made the assumption we weren't going to put ratepayer money into this. But if you're keen for us to scope out, well, what could it look like to have more impact? I think we absolutely can go away and do that, but I'd be keen to get on with the job as well. Unless there's an allergic reaction to that from elected members.
So I'm keen to get on with the job because I think it's important to have funds while we've got them, but I would like to see a broader scope. Particularly, I'm mindful of a conversation I had with Councillor Gray recently about, our communities that sit outside of the main centre, and anything we can do for those communities I know has high value, and so that is marae and small halls where we often go or need to go, or people need to go when there's an emergency. I go back to a question I asked in the operational report agenda item of the last council meeting when we talked about this issue of external funding and the pressure that it puts on the organisation to be chasing external funding. And if it's something that, because this is exciting stuff, this is the stuff that makes a difference for the community, is having some, or are we stretched for resourcing to chase external funding, or is it something we should as a council be thinking more about as having dedicated resource to external funding? I think it sits there, it's important, it's a fantastic initiative. Would love to see us being able to go as wide as possible with those ECA funds and external funding that don't cost the ratepayer but give our community good value.
I just want to say thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. I'm really supportive of the council supporting communities. Having worked in emergency management in Wellington for quite a while, I'm very aware that the national conversation has switched to community hubs, which means that communities become more reliant on themselves, they become independent, and that's exactly what we've been talking about around the council table in terms of weather events, being able to empower our communities to respond themselves to the weather events, educate our communities, which this would come into play with in terms of understanding where they go, what they do, what they need. I'm also aware that this is future fit for us. It's pushing us forward into unknown territory, so I'm really supportive of that. I know that funding is difficult, so while we have it, I'm absolutely get on with the job and use it, and also aware that the DIA is changing the way that their lotto scheme is going to work, and while they're rewriting all of that, there's potential opportunities coming forward with that which we can possibly look into as well. I would just be cautious about wanting to use already allocated funding for much needed community benefit and taking that away and then putting it into something else. If we've got the funding and we know there's a limit to it, but we can still use it, I'm very supportive of that, so thank you.
Thank you. I just thought it might be worth touching on the funding aspect, and I may want to comment because she's been in the conversation more than I have, but through our meetings with ECCT, Te Puni Kokiri and lotteries, it's a sense of really positivity around encouraging us to apply, and so we are optimistic through those channels as well as some other opportunities that may be around.
And I think also the willingness of like TPK, DIA and EECT to work together and for us to do things together a lot more as maybe like one application or one program. They're willing to look at different ways of doing things. It has been really good working with the funders, especially with different things or different kaupapa that we're working on, and they advise that they can help out with.
Thanks. Building on what Councillor Mason said, I certainly agree to full buy ahead. I do think consideration might need to go into having specific resource for external funding. And then my last point is I have a severe allergic reaction to Councillor Jennings. With the proviso, I actually do think that councillors would benefit from a report showing the last 3 years community grants distribution of what goes to life-saving clubs and things like that. So when we are talking about taking funding from one place that's community-based, we actually understand who we're taking it from. Thank you.
Just comment. Apologies, Councillor Mason, no one answered your earlier question / commentary, and then Councillor Fox, just to, I hear you on the dedicated external resourcing. We are doing our best within our resourcing at the moment, but it is, when we think about what does a future fit HDC look like and the priorities you've set around external funding, it is on our mind and noted.
Kia ora noa. I just want to make a statement really, acknowledging all of the marae in the past of the cyclones that have happened in the East Coast and in the Auckland area and Hawke's Bay as well, Ngāti Kahungunu. The marae, regardless of whoever's there, they are there. Always opening their doors or our doors to the community wide. And the same thing has happened in our area when the flooding happened 20 years ago along Motua, Potupa was the only place that didn't get flooded. Everywhere else got flooded. But I know that Shannon School is now their base. Just giving context to supporting this kaupapa for all of our marae and all the mahi that those volunteers behind the scenes don't get acknowledged for. So kia ora, kia kōrua, ngā mihi.
Any last questions?
I guess, look, I really love the project. My only real concern is that you as officers have real comfort that with the work that's being done by other parties, that you're confident you've got the technical and evidential basis for identifying which maraes were included, and that you are comfortable that there has been an appropriate level of engagement with our iwi partners around the identification of these pieces. I'm just really mindful that that's where things could go wrong. So if you've looked at it and you're happy with that level, the methodology that they've used to reach where they've reached, and you're satisfied that there's a appropriate level of engagement, ka pai.
Kia ora. Yes, we have been in communication with the marae on the list. We have connected Mark from Lecture and his team, and Mark has gone out, introduced himself. He's provided an analysis of the assessment that has been undertaken at each of the marae, and he's been working directly with marae, so they are fully informed, and they've got direct access to us if there are any issues at all. There haven't been, but yeah, comfortable.
All right. Thank you, Brett and Ara, for your presentation. I invite Brett to just stay seated as we move to the Mangahao Hydroelectric Power Scheme. Whilst Brett gets ready, I'd just like to thank you, councillors, for getting us back on schedule, despite the previous chair's best efforts. Well done.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. I am joined, I believe, hopefully online by John Snook, who is a representative from the community that yes, there is, who is representing the environmental, whitewater. John, what's the P stand for? Trust. That's right.
Trust. Yeah.
So John will be joining us for part of the presentation today, as I talk to you around the fast track consent briefing for this site. Okay, so today's briefing is intended to give you, Council, an overview of the Mangahao Reconsenting fast track process, outline our involvement to date, highlight the significant community and stakeholder interest that is emerging, provide visibility of the opportunities and considerations raised by stakeholders, and enable early discussion with Council regarding the potential future involvement and strategic interests. The questions we're asking, I guess essentially is what is Council's advocacy role in this? To date, we have been, I guess, softly and working with community. So interested to see your point of view on the role we should take going forward. What level of involvement is appropriate for Horowhenua District Council, how the community and iwi aspirations be reflected, and the opportunities for broader district benefit. Again, we'll be going through all elements of the no-see-do triangle as we work through the presentation. So why this matters, the existing hydroelectric scheme has been operating for about 100 years. It generates 39.9 megawatts of renewable electricity and powers approximately 20,000 homes. There's very strong local interest in recreation and tourism opportunities. The Mangahao Reserve and whitewater facilities, environmental and cultural considerations need to be taken into effect. Regional identity and destination potential, and there's long-term community outcomes that could be aspired to through the reconsenting process. So in terms of a brief history, the power station was commissioned in 1925. 1970, Palmerston North Canoe Club experimented in the Mangahao stream there with canoe slalom. There was two 35-year resource consents granted. In 1992, the New Zealand Canoe Association negotiated mitigations around water release. The EWWPT was established to raise and develop the site, and then we're in where we are now in 2027, the reconsenting through the fast track process. So there's a lot of opportunities through this process, which we'll highlight today, and I think John will talk to in a bit more detail later on. So what's good about the consent process at the moment? Continued operation of an important renewable energy asset. Obviously, they're wanting to renew the consent there for the hydro dam. It supports regional and national energy resilience, an opportunity to improve recreation and tourism outcomes. It could be a catalyst for wider reserve development, and there's an opportunity to strengthen environmental, cultural and community outcomes. We're trying to protect the long-standing recreation and community access that is already there, the existing reserve and the community investment that we've done to date, the environmental and cultural values and future and regional tourism opportunities. There is some risks, and I guess it's good to understand what HDC's role will be through this. The risk to the community through the fast track process is less influence through shortened time frames of the fast track process. There's the potential loss of flexibility around water releases, which will directly impact some of the recreational activity that happens up at the site. Community expectations around the outcomes that they see through the process. Governance and operational uncertainty and environmental and cultural concerns not being appropriately addressed through the process. So what can council do? We can advocate for balanced local outcomes, participate constructively in conversations with stakeholders and agencies, support planning for the reserve and the opportunities, and continue engagement with iwi hapa and the stakeholders that we are already engaged with, and consider future strategic involvement where appropriate. So this is the site. It's a bit difficult to tell on the screen there. It's the Mangahao Reserve is up in the small settlement of Mangahao, which is close to Shannon, for those who haven't been up there. They're a long-standing whitewater and recreation destination. They've hosted local, regional, international events there. It's a lot of investment has gone on into the course there to be able to host these events. There's ongoing use by recreation groups, visitors, training, but there are limitations of when they can do that due to the river flow based on the releases through the consenting process, which I'm sure John will talk to in a bit more detail. We obviously maintain the Mangahao Reserve up there. There's the figures that we've invested in the last the maintenance costs over the last 3 years. We have partnerships with community groups, recreation organisations and agencies, and there's been a significant amount, I guess, of council investment over there in the previous years. So here's some pictures of the site. Obviously, track maintenance, reserve maintenance that we undertake, and some of the infrastructure that is in place to enable some of these events and opportunities that we see coming to Shannon. In terms of the fast track process, the referral is already granted under the fast track legislation. They expect this substantive application later in this year. The existing operation is just effectively seeking to be reconsented rather than any new development of the site. And some important clarifications in that we are not the decision maker. We are involved. We haven't had input directly to date with Contact Energy. Horizon, Stock and other agencies are also involved. So the fast track consent changes the statutory process and timeframes, but it doesn't remove the need to consider the environmental, cultural and stakeholder matters. So that's an important factor. And we are continuing to engage with our stakeholders and who are involved in this site.
Can I annoy you with a question?
Sorry?
Can I annoy you with a question about
Sure.
that? Because I haven't seen the fast track used in this kind of way where there's a existing consent with consent conditions and that it's a reconsenting process. I just haven't seen that yet. And so earlier on in the slides, you talked about how back in like 1991 there was a negotiated agreement or something, I think was the language, with the former organisation, Canoe Association, 92, negotiated mitigations. So are they in the form of consent conditions on the current consent, or do they take the form of an agreement or a side agreement to the consent? Because like it kind of sets the tone for what was negotiated and then what the status or what status those kind of agreements still have. Like, are they completely up for renegotiation, up for grabs, or is there sort of some continuity?
Yeah. And I might, John, this might be a good one for you to talk to, given that your level of involvement.
Yeah, good afternoon, councillors. Can you hear me okay, Brent?
Yes, absolutely, yep.
Yep. Okay, coming through. So it's a good question, and I've just seen the Kaimai consent for the Wairoa River that flows through Tauranga be reconsented by Manawa Energy, so the same power company. It's in the process of being sold as well to Contact. That just rolled over the existing conditions. So exactly as you've said, that was negotiated 35 years ago. It's come to the fast track process, and both parties have agreed just to roll over the agreements as per the last. What I would be encouraging Horowhenua District Council to do is to have a good look at who negotiated that consent. So that was the New Zealand Canoe Association. They no longer exist, but the body that has taken over part of their role, the advocacy role, is Whitewater New Zealand, and they are currently seeing themselves very much as the other named party. So where it was Electricorp New Zealand and the New Zealand Canoe Association, it's now looking like Contact Energy and Whitewater New Zealand. There are in fact, as Brent said, two resource consents. One is for the old Mangahao River, which flows down the eastern side of the ranges, which was dammed back in 1925, and that water sits in a couple of lakes, perhaps three, that then get diverted along with the Tokomaru River down through the Mangahao power station, generate electricity and flows out through the tail race and down the Mangori stream, which is the second resource consent, because of the increased flow, the mitigations there were requirements for those farms to have state highway bridges put across them, so the cows who used to walk across the river now need to walk across the bridge, and so forth. So that river changed dramatically when they diverted that flow, and that's what the resource consent I'm asking Brent, and he's talking to you about today, to really zoom in on it. So when Contact Energy is generating power, is there anything else we would like to work with them on in order to maximise not only the generation potential, because they're going to generate no matter, every time they flow down that river, they're generating. So we're not interested in the resource consent of the eastern side of the ranges, that's Whitewater New Zealand territory. What I'm saying to Horowhenua District Council is perhaps you should be really interested in this resource consent and the mitigations that sit around that, because if you can know when that water is flowing, you can run a rafting activity. If you know when that water is flowing and have some control over it, you can organise international events. You can work with Fire and Emergency New Zealand to run a rescue, the Lower North Island rescue, swiftwater rescue venue and the other opportunities that sit there. But if it just comes off and on in order to optimise peak power, you can't really schedule events and activities around it because you're never quite sure whether it's going to go on, whether it's going to go off. And so it's really this western side of the ranges that I think you should be interested in. I'm sitting here in Hamilton at the moment, actually, and I know all of the activity that's going on in Raglan, the big 10-day international surfing event. Really, Shannon, is your Raglan, is how I would frame it. That you could run 10-day international kayak events in Shannon if you could get 10 days of water. At the moment, that resource consent, 35 years, and I just pause on that 35 years. It's a long time. It's 10 Olympic Games cycles is what I calculated this morning as I drove to Hamilton. And this is the opportunity. So yes, it is in the fast track process, but I would strongly encourage you to insert yourself into that process and say, actually, we can't be passive about this. There is $500 million at conservative levels that's going to be extracted in terms of electrical generation wealth from this one power station over the next 35 years. And some of that should come back to the community. It should come back in jobs with fire and emergency. It should come back in events. It should come back in tourism. And so I would argue that you need to get involved in that fast track process. And so that's the opportunity, as I see it. It's a 35-year resource consent. The one you're interested in is this eastern side, the western side of the ranges. It's the Mangahao stream, the generation one. I don't think Whitewater New Zealand is the party that serves you best in that. They're really trying to maximise the number of days down the eastern side of the ranges through the Old River, where no generation can occur. Clearly, the consent will go ahead. It's just what does Horowhenua as a region get out of it by way of economic and community and cultural development? And so that's really my role here, was to come and support Brent and to really try and help you to understand the opportunity that sits here in this moment. And then when that agreement gets signed, whoever it gets signed with, that's then locked in for the next 35 years, and it outlives me and many others. So hence why I'm passionate about it. I've been paddling at that site since 1984. I saw the agreement get signed in 1992, and I've been patiently waiting for the 35 years to get this moment again.
Thanks, John. So moving ahead with the presentation, and we'll come back to John in a few minutes to talk in a bit more detail around some of those opportunities that he sees. To date, we've been in discussions with Contact King Country Energy through the fast track consenting process. We probably need to elevate that a little bit more, because at this stage it's just been written into a portal and we haven't heard a lot back. We've been closely working with John over probably the last 6 to 12 months around. He's pulled us into a number of different hui around the opportunities that this may present. And along with Iwi and Hapu, he's been working really closely with. We know there's strong community interest around some of the things that John's just spoke around, particularly the water releases, reserve development, tourism, environmental outcomes and cultural outcomes, and different governance arrangements. So we are keen to test where we think we need to go with this one. Our current position is, we're not the consenting authority, we're not the consent holder. We've been involved as a stakeholder to date. We see Council's role as partner, advocate for local outcomes. We're obviously the reserve owner and manager, and the facilitator of some strategic conversations, rather than the decision maker, the regulator, or the consent holder. And we'll come back to John now to talk through the next few slides. This is where you'll hear his passion around some of the opportunities that he sees, being so close to this as well. So back to you, John.
So we set up the trust in 2001, the Environmental Whitewater Park Trust. We did it to take the burden off Palmerston North Canoe Club, who had been handed the responsibility from the now defunct New Zealand Canoe Association to manage the resource consent. So the club was really focused in there in Palmy, and we set up the Environmental Whitewater Park Trust. We broadened its terms to make sure that the land that had been really abused, it was full of fly tipping. The power company had dumped all of their rubbish on site. The native plants had been squashed, and there was rampant weeds and no bird life. So we wanted to make it broader than just kayaking. And I think that's one of its biggest opportunities today, is that the kayaking's amazing, but there's so much more happening there now. And we've re-established the native plants and bird life. That's all been brought back into the reserve. Horowhenua District Council have been really good in working with us over that time. Even when they weren't landowners, we worked closely with Peter Shaw and the like to bring that reserve back to life. And then subsequently, Craig and others, Sean, have taken over the ownership through Horowhenua District Council, and we've got a partnership agreement, a heads of agreement with you through to the end of 2027, I think. And we've had one since we were brought into life. So that relationship is strong. We've reached out to Ngāti Whakatiri and others, more Opoko, to really understand what tangata whenua want from this land, because we don't live there. And I think that's a really important differentiation, is we love the site. We've rehabbed the site. We feel close to it, but ultimately it's not ours. And we feel like we might have, even with the best intentions, done it as we wanted it, as opposed to what does Horowhenua and its communities want from it. And I think this is where the next 35 years offer some of the biggest opportunities. The current resource consent allows for 14 days where we can ask them to turn it on at 8 a.m. in the morning and it turns off at 4 p.m. So we've got 14 days where we can know when the water is flowing in any given calendar year. Given that they're making money every time they do flow, it flows pretty much every day. We just don't know when it's going to go on and off. And so you can't organise anything. So if the region could get more control over that water, if it came on in the mornings from 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock till 12 o'clock, someone could have a rafting business from the base of the dam down to Shannon. But they need to know it's going to go on and need to know it's going to go off. It's one of the best locations now for school groups from the wider Horowhenua Manawatu to come camp on site. Mangahao Hall across the road for some cooking, some shelter if the weather turns bad. They get the camping experience, they get the mountain bike, kayaking experiences. They've got the native reserve, they've got the flora and fauna, they've got the power generation. So they've got lots of activities they can study on site. 30 minutes from Palmerston, 20 minutes from Levin, 30 minutes from Otaki. So you've got drawing on some big schools that could be based there. You've got the tourism, as I said, freedom camping on site. It's the gateway to Te Araroa, both entering and exiting. Again, an opportunity for companies to supply goods, to allow respite from the trek, accommodation halfway, a bit like your cycle trail, the rail trail. So I can't possibly tell the community what kind of business they're going to set up, but I just know that given that northern space of the Horowhenua, the economic climate of that area, the growth in people, there's, as I see it, the raglan of the Horowhenua sitting right there ready to be tapped into. But having much more control over when and where that water flows would be the number one requirement. I also think, given that $500 million that Contact Energy is going to remove from that resource, that there's a case to be argued that even if there was 1% of that, 5 million every 10 years going into some capital development, whether that's in the Mangahao Reserve or in Shannon, or linking the two with a walkway down that beautiful stream, a cycle track, allowing the kids to come up to our club rooms. The things that you might see in other countries where they've really valued that participation, that recreation. The reason why we signed up an agreement with Sport Horowhenua was to really try and bring out the kids of the region into all parts of paddle sport. So whether that's surf lifesaving, canoe polo, Whakamana, there's the opportunity to build a club structure that allows kids to access that on bicycles safely from Shannon Primary through to the high schools of the region, who used to be very strong in the sports that surrounds kayaking, but it's faded a little bit over recent years, but there's nothing to stop us bringing that back. So really just wanted to touch on that. The final thing I would say is we have signed an agreement with Fire and Emergency New Zealand, who love the fact you can turn a river on and off, because with global warming, with the flooding that we've seen, Fire and Emergency really has to get their head around rescue in flood situations, and hence why they like to put a car in the river while the river's off. The river comes on under our control. They do their rescue in a safe environment. They practice removing people from cars, on cars, from houses, driving vehicles, and then the river goes back down and they extract the car body, put it on the bank, and no harm is done. So we are working closely with Fire and Emergency with some of the 14 days a year to allow them to do that. But what I guess I'm saying is the region needs more than 14 days in order to do this well and to extract the full benefit. It also needs some capital investment from the power company, who's otherwise dining free on what is a very valuable resource. So nothing additional there. Brent, happy to take questions or
John,
defer to you.
John, it's Councillor Sam Jennings. I just want to get into the water release stuff.
Sure.
If that's okay. So basically you said current arrangements are 14 days where you are guaranteed the flow that you need. And I understand under the current arrangements you've got like a 6-month notice requirement, is that right? Like you've got to give the power
Correct.
company 6 months notice. So
we can't take any more than 5 days in consecutive days, and if we give a 4-day notice, if we want a 4-day event, which is the minimum that we need, then we need to give them 6 months.
Okay.
Notice, yeah.
All right. Because so basically, what you're saying, just what I'm hearing from you, is that you don't want to roll over the current arrangements because they're kind of not working for you, but also I got the sense from talking with others that often the day flow model is not kind of what you need either, because you don't necessarily need water flowing for 8 hours. You might need it concentrated to kind of like a couple of hours or on a weekend afternoon or whatever. So is it fair to say that kind of the power company wants more flexibility and you guys also want more flexibility, and so where are you at with that kind of discussion with them directly around, hey, we both want flexibility, can we work out an arrangement here? Because presumably it's your big event days, you want to plan for and you want to schedule well in advance, but some other stuff you can be a lot more flexible around, and you're probably need to be flexible around weather and other things. Can you just talk to me like about that kind of topic?
Yeah, great. There's a number of really, really good points in that, and thanks for doing that deep thinking. We have talked to Contact Energy. They basically said 2 things to us. One was, A, we don't care what you want. We're just going to give you. You're lucky to get the 14 days, and you should be happy with that. The number 2 point they told us was, we're not actually going to talk to you, even though you've administered it for the last 25 years. We're going to talk to Whitewater New Zealand. And so that would be the first thing that Brent has seen the correspondence. We're pushing strongly back on that and saying, well, Whitewater New Zealand care about some things. They want our pristine rivers to be returned, and they're quite happy to receive money from Contact Energy every time they don't release down the old Mangahao River. Remember, every time they release 1 day down the old Mangahao River, they lose 3 days generation on the Mangori stream. So not only do they make no money out of that release down the Mangahao River, they lose 3 days generation on where we want the water to flow. So that's what they're trading off, and they're more interested in talking to Whitewater New Zealand because they're getting a free run with them. Whitewater New Zealand don't even have a rep in the lower North Island, so they're not all that interested and haven't put up much of a fight anywhere around the country. Your point around flexibility, we also addressed with them and said, well, it suits neither of us to flow it from 8 till 4, knowing that there's no one paddling between 11 and 2. Why don't we have something in the mechanism that allows us to turn that off? And we've got stadium lights out there. We've got football field stadium lights that we can't use unless we happen to go out there when it happens to be flowing and we turn on the lights. We can't plan an event under lights because nowhere in that resource consent can we turn that river on or guarantee the flow in the evening. So we're much like you. We would rather have an hour. We said, well, let's have 500 hours a year we could order as opposed to 14 days. That makes a lot more sense to me. And then you go, well, how would we allocate those 500 days? Is there a rafting company that wants to raft on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8 till 12? Let's guarantee them that water, at least in these months of the year when tourism's on. So, and that uses up a quantum of those 500 hours. That's the type of approach I thought would make a lot more sense as opposed to a blanket 14 days. The Wairoa case I gave you earlier is when they flow down the old Wairoa River instead of putting it through the Kaimai power station. So they get 26 days a year flowing down the old river. Now, when they flow down that old river, they drain it from the lake and it doesn't go through the power station. So even that example says you're more prepared to give them 26 days and get no generation from those 26 days than to give us 26 days and you're generating at the same time. I think that's the important difference that seems to get lost in these discussions is, yes, you might not be optimising the full peak price that you could have got for that water, but you are still getting paid for it. You're not putting it down the river and not going through a power station. Anyway, we've got those 14 days. They're locked and loaded, and like you, I think we need much more flexibility. The power company sees flexibility as just optimising peak power prices with fuel load and using an algorithm to come on and off the national grid when they see fit. That's their definition of flexibility. Their definition of flexibility definitely isn't in working with us to maximise our utilisation of the venue. So I think we've got very different concepts of flexibility.
Yeah, thanks, John. So basically, just so I'm absolutely clear, and then I'll shut up. Is so they're basically, your understanding is their proposal is just to roll over the current 14-day arrangement and not actually examine or have a conversation with you about flexibility.
Correct. They just want to roll it over and keep going.
Thank you.
And what's more, they don't want to talk to us. They want to talk to Whitewater New Zealand, and Whitewater New Zealand just wants their 2 days down the old river, and they're happy to roll over the existing 14 days.
So I think part of the purpose of today's conversation is to, like, A, make you aware of this, but B, get us, like, Brent's been working with John and the team, but even just as recent as correspondence from Contact yesterday, like, they are very much, this is kind of stay in your lane. This will work with Whitewater New Zealand on this, and I think we're seeking our mandate on how hard we push back and being like, actually, this is out. You need to talk with us, and we are. That they haven't quite liked the fact that we're holding hands, have they, John?
No, is that you, Monique? I can't.
Yeah, it's Monique. Sorry. Hello.
Oh, no, hi. Nice to hear from you. No, neither party have enjoyed the fact that we have been working with the local community as we have been for many years. I set up the trust, and I could have done the community engagement better, but we have been doing it, and we've gifted boats to Shannon 2000, and we've worked with the local community. We've really tried to bring them into the sport and to the venue, and Horowhenua District Council have been amazing partners on that. I think the reserve is still a really well kept secret. I think it could be much better. I think Mana Whenua have to lead that charge, and we need to take a back seat, and our trust could be rewritten. But clearly Whitewater New Zealand and Contact Energy just want it, as was it done in 1992, to be a handshake agreement that says let's keep out of each other's way. New Zealand Canoe Association agrees to this, and ECNZ agrees to that, and that's what those two parties wish to happen again. Even though neither of those two parties currently exist, they pretend that they do, and Contact is taking the ECNZ role, and Whitewater New Zealand is taking the New Zealand Canoe Association role. I would say the ground has shifted monumentally over that 35 years on lots of levels, and it's time for the community to say what they want from their reserve. You now own it, and from that generation, at least in part, of how you want that to impact the economic and sustainability of the community that surrounds it.
Right, lovely, Paula. It's interesting you get a message to stay in your lane when you think about destination management and micro events that we want to encourage. That's well and truly in our lane. I guess my question, John, to you is just about, I'm interested a little bit more about the capital investment. So what capital investment have you to date received from Contact Energy? And I guess what do you aspire that to be, and what's been their reaction to that, given at the moment they don't want to give you any more than 14 days?
Okay, so Contact Energy has given no capital input into the venue. And before them, ECNZ in that 1992 agreement agreed to $100,000, which was spent on concrete that was poured into just below the bridge, and ultimately we drowned in subsequent modifications to the river because it was done really badly. So it was predated my involvement with the development of the venue, and that $100,000 was wasted on some engineer trying to build a wave. The power companies, King Country Energy, Todd Energy, the ones that have all preceded ECNZ, have not put in any capital. What they have done is give us a license to occupy. If you know the area at all, it's to the right as you drive in, just before you get to the bridge. There's a car park. We sealed that car park, so we paid for the sealing of that car park. We fenced it off. We created an amphitheatre in there and brought back the native. It's probably one of my favourite areas. We had this vision of a community auditorium with an amphitheatre, and so we've got single phase plugs, concrete pad, grass embankment, native bush there. For that, we've got car parking, and we also rehabbed an old building into an ablution block, which is swipe fob access, so people can buy the fob card and get toilets and showers. So we have a license to occupy that, which the power company could take off us at any time. And one of the things I've said to Brent is, one of the things you might want to negotiate in the next consent is a peppercorn sale and purchase $1 of that land, so that you actually own it as part of the reserve, because it's an important part to the reserve with the toilets and showers and the power and running water and things that are there. So I would seek to get that back if I was you. We just have a license to occupy it at the moment. The power company's really done nothing but abuse that land, is my opinion, and they've given no capital development costs for anything. The Horowhenua District Council, when we first set up, gave us a fairly sizable capital, and it might have been $30,000, and subsequently you do support our weed and pest control annually. Palmerston North City Council put $100,000 into that venue, and other organisations have put the best part of $2 million into the venue, and so our trust has that asset, and it depreciates, and we try and invest at the rate of depreciation. But you all know how hard that is, especially for a small community trust. We're at the point where we need to decide what is the trust going to do for the next 35 years, and we have talked to Monique and Brent about what does a new trust look like. We could wind up and pass our assets on. You could rent the venue to the likes of Canoe Slalom New Zealand. You could have all the assets. So we're up for any part of this discussion. What we would hate to see happen is that there's some kind of agreement signed by Whitewater New Zealand. There's 14 days a year. Our trust still doesn't have the community involved in the governance of it. and over time, as we all die out, speaking about me and the other trustees, that $2 million gets lost, and the real potential of the venue never gets fully realised because it needs more. It needs more community input and more events, more different types of groups running out of there. So to answer your question, there's been about $2 million spent on there, and none of it has been the power companies.
Kia ora, John.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Lani Kitu, Councillor Lani Kitu speaking. I'm of Ngāti Whakatere descent, and I'm also a Shannon girl, born and raised. So I'm aware of some of these projects that you've been working on. Shannon 2000 with the kayaks. I was there as one of the volunteers with the rangatahi back then. I just want to support what you're saying because I do agree that there needs to be more in terms of developing the area. I just want to know, in terms of the partnership or the talks you've been having with, in particular, Mana Whenua Ngāti Whakatere, how is that going? And what is their view? Or are you still having talks? And... Yeah, sorry, you go.
Oh, no. Aroha mai. Ngā mihi nui, Lani. Carol's meeting with Robert again this week. It's evolving our relationship. We started off with a hiss and a roar with Shannon 2000, and we probably lost our way in terms of that relationship. Over the last couple of years, we've probably matured as people and have lost some of the busyness from our lives and said, well, actually, we need to do this better than we have done before. It needs to support the rangatahi of that region, and if it doesn't do that, it's not doing anything of what it should. If just a bunch of people from Auckland arrive once a year for a race, we've all missed the opportunity. But what should be happening is the tamariki from Shannon should be using parts of that river on a regular basis. There should be tourism that's led by people of the local region. There should be events and school groups coming in there and enjoying that space. There should be jobs at Fire and Emergency that were created because people saw what the Lower North Island Rescue Centre was doing and said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. So if that's the big picture. I thank you for your support of our early steps. I just love the next 35 years to be much more than the last 35 years. And for us all to really get a sense of what this could be, which I don't think any of us did as we went through the various stages of the path, resource consent processes and power companies just generating electricity and the water goes down the river. And we never really understood the opportunity. But I think in 2026, 2027, that's much clearer, and your role, I love to hear about that micro development stuff that was mentioned by the councillor, because that's really what this place offers, is the ability to generate economic return to a much wider group of citizens than it currently is doing. Yes. Pretty much all of the resource wealth is exported from your region to other regions, and I'm suggesting you want to do something about that, and we'd love to help if we can.
Absolutely. I think working together with iwi, Mana Whenua in particular. So we have had a school holiday program that was just run, and a lot of the tamariki rangatahi from the ages of 10 to 15. So they were doing water testing, and they do regular water testing through the school as well. That's through Tai o Whakatere. So that the tamariki are connecting and being educated about their own environment and their own backyard with Shannon. And that's working awesomely well. So I guess we need to be working together in terms of the iwi and the organiser, all the stakeholders as you talk about, so that I can see the vision. The vision has been there for a long, long time. I think it's just aligning with each other to get this off the ground. And it's a shame to hear that Electra's doing what they're doing. So kia ora, John, ngā mihi.
Kia ora, Lani. We are working with Robert around a cultural assessment of the reserve because we think that's really critical to, before any more development or change happens there, that we really get a sense of the cultural values that and artefacts that may be there already and that need to be preserved and magnified. And the story told, I don't think we're telling a very good cultural story there at the moment. The sign at beside the bridge there was one I did while I worked at UCOL back in the turn of the century that talks about the power company and the site. But there's a beautiful place for stories to be told and to get people drawn into the region to tell the energy generation story, the cultural story, the native reserve story, along with the kayaking and other stories that will eventuate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, John. My name is Katrina Mitchell-Kutab. I'm another councillor. I've got a couple of questions, but also a comment. And firstly, just thank you, Brent, for bringing some fabulous ideas that we've had over the last few months in terms of trying to encourage that destination attraction, other sources of income, especially with the O2NL coming, with some of the concerns that we have around the table. So I really appreciate this opportunity to explore this, and I'm very supportive of exploring the avenues that you've put in front of us. So in two questions, in terms of the council's representing the community moving forward with Electra, how receptive do you think the power company will be to the council becoming involved in these conversations, given that they are seem to be erring towards the white water rafting company? I'm sorry if I've got their name wrong, number one. And secondly, what concerns me is sometimes when these events or when these plans come into fruition, it isn't always the community that benefits. And I would be really, really interested in discussing how our community can actually, a wider community, can benefit from this without being unable to partake because it's financially out of their reach. We have a huge mental crisis in terms of our youth in our wider community. So them being able to access the resources that this could possibly provide would be something I'd be interested in. And I would hope that there would be discussions around how that would be generated in terms of supporting the community rather than putting a dollar amount on and then the door is closed.
Great questions. The first one's quite easy. Contact wants to work with the person who gives them the least resistance. So Whitewater New Zealand isn't a rafting company. They're an advocacy group like Forest and Bird, Federation Mountain Club. So they're there to advocate for not damming any more rivers and to undam the current rivers. So they're really focused in on the Mangahao River, which flows down the eastern side of the ranges, which has no water that flows down it because it was dammed in 1925, and it now flows down the western side of the ranges through the Mangahao power station. So they would rather talk to Whitewater New Zealand and say, we'll give you 1 or 2 days down that river, and by the way, there's this other resource consent, but you don't need to worry about that, which is for the generation through the power station. So that's why they would rather deal with them. They're really a competitor of ours, yours, the communities, because every time they flow down the old river, the power company loses a whole bunch of money and they lose 3 days of generation. And 3 days when we could have asked for them to flow it down the slalom course or the rest of the river. So Whitewater New Zealand are happy to take a payoff and say, okay, give us $50,000 and let's be done with it, which is what they have done at the Waitaha, for example, on the west coast. They didn't fight to save that river. The power company, it was another fast track, said, here's $100,000 a year, let us dam the river, and Whitewater New Zealand said that's fine. So that's why they'd rather talk to them than you. And I'm saying, if I'm Horowhenua District Council and interested in economic and community development, I'm going to insert myself into that conversation and say, hang on a minute, you've got to talk to us because we've got we've got requirements for that resource. Coming down the western side of the ranges, we want to have more control over it, not just the spot market of the power price. The second part is around how do we get the community involved. Well, we do try to do that as much as possible. So when the athletes come for our 4-day annual training camp or our 4-day international slalom events, we have 2 of those a year. They stay in Foxton, they stay in Levin, so there's some accommodation, there's some food, there's the Foxton New World, there's the cafes and things, and Shannon do quite well as the petrol companies. Levin does quite well out of accommodation as well. So that's where the athletes tend to stay rather than camping on site. Camping is possible, and there's a little bit of that, but mostly it's with Airbnb and hotel, motel in the surrounding district. Generally, Palmerston North used to be a location, but generally it's gone to Foxton and Levin now. And Shannon, there's some good Airbnbs in Shannon. So that's a relatively minor, but not unnoticed economic place. What I'm saying is if we had more than 14 days, if we could have 10 days straight like Raglan's having, then you could have the bigger international events. You might tie it in with Auckland at Victor Wero Whitewater Park. So you have the Whitewater Park experience in Auckland, which is man-made ditch in the middle of a highway with the A300s flying over the top, versus Shannon, which the international athletes love, which is through a native bush beside a natural river, with all the amenities and requirements of the International Canoe Federation, but in a very unique World Cup venue. And so, again, I'll keep encouraging us to try and get more days, to try and get more consecutive days, to try and get longer windows or move to an hours approach so that we can have a bigger impact. Because then you can bring up, if it flowed every Wednesday from 4 till 6, for example, we could bring up, once the primary school or the intermediate age kids were of a certain ability, they could come up. If their boats were able to be stored on site in the club rooms, suddenly you open up that opportunity to our rangatahi to use the venue to get better in the sport. Boats get donated or fundraised for, and we start to pull them into a sport that otherwise they're not getting pulled into because, as you say, it's too hard, too expensive.
Thank you, John. Look, I'm mindful of time here, and I guess you guys have heard John's passion and the vision and some of the ideas that he's presented. I guess for us to go away today, I'm really keen to get a sense from Council of how hard you want us to push, what our role is moving forward as we go through the fast track consent. So I'm really keen to hear what you expect of us over the next wee while.
I'm happy to start. If this process was to go on every power site in the country for a renewal consent, our power bills would double. So I'm not overly fussed. I think it's a power station. It's there. If that power station wasn't there, I don't think there would be canoeing there. So first and foremost, it should generate power. The biggest problem New Zealand's power grid has is the ability to switch on power resources and off power resources when people use the power. If we were to do this across our whole network, that just increases prices. So I just don't see the benefit of it.
I would support going hard and fast for the simple reason that we've got two solar farms coming in, that we are going for growth, so we need attractions for people for balanced work life. Adding in for a rangatahi to be outside of a screen, all sorts of those sorts of benefits. Yes, there's going to be a cost, but then if we're going for growth, what are we offering the people to come to? And in today's technology, it should be manageable if they're willing to do it. It's a case of they don't think they need to.
I'm in support of going for it. I remember many, many years ago when we were doing some looking, I think it might have even been my first reading on council, looking at the way rates were organised, and we had a presentation from the power station because they were frustrated that their rates were going to rise, and then to hear that they don't actually contribute anything back to our community. I think it's time that we're now in a position to have a stronger conversation with them. The reason I support going for it and looking at what we can achieve, this is a pretty special site in the district. It's a pretty significant resource. It's not used much at the moment. I admit I don't go out there because it doesn't feel open, and it doesn't, I think we could do a lot more to improve it. But the other reason I support going for it is that it aligns with entry and exit points for Te Araroa, and I don't think we realise how much that is growing year on year. With travellers coming to New Zealand, we should take advantage of that, and to think that rangatahi could have access to good water, safe water experiences. I would fully support that, and the partnership with Ngāti Whakatere, who I know have always had strong alignment with ensuring that there is a richness in education and understanding of the whenua in that area and the awa. So yeah, I think it's an opportunity that we cannot let pass by without having a good look and without trying to enter into some good partnerships with contacting King Country Energy.
Aika, Councillor Mason's thoughts. We are going for growth. Let's push ahead. I'm looking for any contrary opinions. Otherwise, I'm conscious of time. Brett, I hope you got consensus on that. Thank you to John. Love your passion. I could hear it through the screen. Appreciate your presentation, and thank you, Brett.
Thanks, everyone.
We have 2 minutes till our next presentation. So, and based on the words of Sally, it's a bit over 45, but have a little stand up and we'll get started at 3 o'clock.
a lot of you met Phil. So from start to finish in terms of consenting of the new landfill through this process of closure. So if there's any particular technical questions, we'll throw to Phil. So yeah, just see Phil online now, so that's great, thank you. I also have a couple of the team unavailable today, and so it's just myself will step you through some of the progress, not seeking any decisions today, but really it is an update for a lot of the information that has been shared with the community, be it the project management group, PMG, or the NLG, a number of site visits. So there's a fairly significant volume of material that's being passed back and forth through these processes, and also engagement with wider community groups as we move towards the upcoming consent process. And so really today is just a timely opportunity to provide that high-level summary, and just really noting that the path in terms of advanced monitoring framework, a lot of the on-site testing, this is part of a package of work that was committed in the latter part of 2025, and we've got around about a 12-month window, and I'll talk you through some of the timing around that in future interactions. So why is a monitoring report required? Effectively, we went through a process in November 2025 trying to understand, really effectively revisiting the BPO project, which was identified as having a number of fatal flaws in terms of extracting groundwater from the site and taking off-site. And so we went through a process with Tonkin Taylor to peer review that. And really what was highlighted was there was little evidence to support additional investigation of work for leachate extraction. So we are intending over the next 12 months, in simple terms, we're doing some geophysical type testing, we're understanding what the groundwater is doing, and we're applying a number of additional bore sites to try and uncover if there is evidence and risk in the future for environmental harm. The report also touched on the ongoing concerns from community about landfill capping, and I know that we have had some communication late yesterday evening around the capping that has been shared out to elected members, and we've got community members in attendance today. But if, in simple terms, what that recommendation from Tonkin Taylor has confirmed is that there is a high level uncertainty about the volume and quantity of discharge from the landfill. So we're talking a landfill that closed in the early 2000s. It's been there for some time. The top of that landfill is capped. We accept that there is leachate migrating out into the environment. And so the piece of work that's been undertaken currently, and the idea is to close that out and have a lot of information to give more certainty before the end of the year, is to effectively frame and understand that in more detail. So further capping would reduce the certainty of discharge, but the understanding of the unmitigated potential, so in terms of what's currently happening, needs to be better understood to determine if an intervention is required. So in simple terms, it's an old landfill. There is a number of theories that have been shared around that. We will also ensure that that information from community is being shared with Tonkin Taylor, our experts, but at this point there's not enough evidence to determine that it would be a cost-effective investment given the disruption on the site. So the work that's been underway, we had this, these findings were presented in November. The work that's currently underway is to determine if there is further impact or risk from that leachate and what we can do about it. Happy to pause there for questions.
Do we have an idea of the sort of cost implications of the further capping at this stage, if we were to go ahead?
The estimates were up around $1.5 million, and I can openly share that we are still seeking opportunities, alongside the O2L project. If there was clay material that could be provided, there have been a number of conversations trying to see if we could, get material to site and come up with a more cost-effective mechanism that we could bring back to council. But effectively, the council decision on the table at the moment is not to proceed with that capping. Ideally, if that decision was to land back on the council table, we would utilise the evidence through this latest stage of investigation, which has been committed in November 25, to inform a future decision.
Daniel, what is the current level of environmental risk?
So and this was part of the work around that groundwater extraction project, and you can see some of the images on the screen here, which is a fairly thriving wetland at the base of the existing landfill. The evidence that was presented when we investigated was that we would cause significant damage to that wetland, so that would have to be replaced somewhere else. So that's a offset type mitigation, and we also had to do quite a number of ecological type studies, including on the Horowhenua stream. The ecologist report, which has been shared previously, stated that there isn't current evidence of environmental harm. So what we're doing now through the current stage of investigation is to ensure that there is no risk of that in the future. If there is risk determined through a better understanding of what's happening in that groundwater profile, then we would have to look at alternatives to remedy it. So as of today, there is not a current or imminent risk, and that's the advice that we're getting from our experts.
Are we confident the monitoring framework is sufficient to detect issues early?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Councillor Katrina. Just building on David's point, because I'm kind of at the point where, I just want this issue to just go away. To be honest, it's just so. I'm slowly losing the will to live on this topic, you guys are doing so much hard work, and I know the community, wants to get this right. And you might not want to air this in a public setting, but do we have something in mind, a price tag in mind that says, if there was a certain price tag that if we could do this capping within a certain budget, we'd do it, and it's cost effective? Because the suggestion of getting clay material from NZTA would hopefully, presumably, reduce cost, all that kind of stuff. Do we kind of have a background figure of, if it's this price, we'd do it. We'd go ahead and do it, and just, even if we're not sure that it's going to be the most value add or impactful thing, is there a price tag at which we would just go, yeah, look, we're just going to do it and get it done?
We don't have a formal council position on that from elected members in terms of the appetite. What officers were tasked with was to go away and get the evidence to say this needs to be done, and through that work in the peer review, the message that come back was, in terms of that last 25 years of mitigation, there's material in the environment that may need to be addressed. Simply capping it at the top, acknowledging that ideally if it was the sides were capped 25 years ago, we would have got the 25 years of benefit from that. There's not currently enough, and there's differing views certainly within the community on this. All we're trying to get to as officers is a minimum level of evidence to say this needs to happen. I don't know whether, Phil, you've got any further context you'd want to provide. I know it's Tonkin Taylor that are supporting this, but whether there's any particular views you wanted to share on that.
Hi, thank you. I'm battling kind of to hear a little bit. Can you just explain a little bit more on the question?
Yes, the question is, would effectively the value of just throwing some funds to say let's cap the sides, knowing that that's potentially not the issue or the solution to the problem in the environment, which is not currently causing a detrimental impact on the Horowhenua stream, but it could, and in the next 6 to 12 months, we're looking to uncover a lot more of a firm view on what that impact could be. Alongside that, we're also looking to investigate a wetland enhancement project, which could go some way towards mitigating those impacts, but also come with ecological and cultural, environmental improvements as well. And so really the decision is to say, if there was a finite amount of resource funding available, would it be best placed in fixing the problem at the toe if the evidence says yes, there's something, intervention required, or would it be better with a wetland to extend that, or to go and do the capping if there was, an appetite to move forward with that without evidence? That would require a council decision, but ideally we should be able to give more certainty about what's happening in that environment and answer this question and answer the concerns of the community in this process. So that is the intention of the current plan of work, which has been committed by a resolution of council.
Okay. So a few comments. I guess, in terms of capping, and we're talking about what we call Area A or the old landfill, I don't think that would be prudent to go ahead and do that, because we haven't actually proven from a robust point of view that actually capping it is really going to make that much difference. Tonkin and Taylor have certainly indicated, that it's an old landfill. There's a lot of leaching that has occurred. Capping it is not going to make a big difference. And from what I can see, their assessment is really based on quite a high level sort of assessment. I think that if you really wanted to drill down into that, you could do a bit more science. But I personally think that it's probably not going to prove, though, that the extent of infiltration of rainwater in there is as extensive as has been estimated elsewhere, and I don't believe it's going to make that much difference. So I also think there are a couple of other things. So what Tonkin and Taylor are proposing with the advanced monitoring framework, I think, is an appropriate way to go to gather some more additional information which appear to be missing from what was done previously by other consultants. And a really important aspect which has sort of come to the fore is what is the effect of that current wetland at the moment. And we've seen some pictures there of a thriving wetland, and it would appear that there are some processes occurring in there that are dealing quite effectively to some of the high concentrations of some of the parameters like the ammoniacal, the nitrogen, and so on that's occurring in there. So I think, as I understand it, part of what Tonkin and Taylor are going to be doing is looking actually at those processes just to confirm that this is actually happening. And if indeed it is occurring, then that's really quite a good thing. And basically making the best opportunity and use of that wetland and perhaps enhancing it further on the property that we've got now with the former Tartner property.
Thank you, Phil. I understand there's frustration with timing. Why can't we make a decision? It is very early in this process that Tonkin Taylor have only just got to the site visit to look at this wetland enhancement project. I'm not intending to stand here today with the outcomes of that piece of work. They're only just getting underway, and in due course we'll bring them along to answer concerns from the community, which we intend to do as we go on this journey, but also get back in front of council when we are in a position to make decisions. However, anecdotally, when the wetland expert turned up to site and saw the state of the current undergrowth, there was a level of confusion around the thriving species in there, and what some of the what some of the testing results are telling us. So it's there is further work to do to understand that the picture that they'd built in their head coming to site of a barren environment wasn't what they come into in the site, and the opportunity for enhancement is certainly being worked through. And there's a specific program of work which I'll talk to shortly, but not in a lot of detail because we're only just underway. So really today was a check-in to advise elected members that there is work happening. There's a lot more interface with community, and it's important that I get a steer today if there is an appetite for more of that information to be shared, or for elected members to participate in some of those community meetings. The door's always open for that as well. Before we got a question.
No, I was just going to say, I am very. Is it working?
Yeah.
and I am very supportive of it. I guess for me, it's that very, as Councillor as Sam was saying, there is a very vibrant tension within the community that does concern me, because there seems to be conflicting understandings of, yes, there's an increase in leachate plume and there is a contamination that's continuing, and then, well, maybe it isn't. And I think that's where the concern in the community is there leachate? Is it increasing? And really positively, regardless of what happens, the council is definitely moving forward in terms of mitigating that with the environment and the stream in mind, regardless of what happens.
Yes, acknowledging that, and it's possibly a good point that's being raised around that mistrust and the differing views. Council have made a decision, and you'll see a slide shortly. Council previously made a decision to close the landfill, and the second part of today's presentation is around the updating of consent conditions, which we kind of look at as the lock to put on the gate. However, council officers have made an assumption through this process that through what they've heard from a number of the community is that no way never should be do anything else with the site. It should be closed, should be allowed to heal. However, there's been conversations around the prospect of clean fill, which wouldn't be refuse, but if there was an opportunity to import clean fill of a suitable quality to cap the sides of the landfill, how could that economically be facilitated? In some of the conversations we've had with community groups, I've made offhand comments that we could quite easily secure an operator for that site to manage a clean fill operation, which could potentially deliver revenue, but also allow for those outcomes in terms of capping. We, as council, haven't explored that at all. There's no paper come back to get direction around future use of the landfill. We're trying to create the closure before we look too far to the future, but that would provide a very real opportunity to deliver those things that we perhaps say, well, there's not evidence to say it has to be capped. However, here's a way that we can cap it, and it's no cost to the ratepayer. So that's where the tension is, and that where there are some emerging views from community members that there would be an appetite for clean billing, knowing that other community members wouldn't be in support. So there would be a separate process around that, and it's the paying investment of time and return. If it's not unilaterally supported, is that a road that council would want to go down? So I'm happy to speak to that publicly. There's no opportunity on record, but I know that there's in the lower North Island there's challenges with clean filling, and the site would ideally lend itself to that if the decision was made to go through a process with community. So that's in the back of our mind, but it's not something that's been progressed at this point, but would provide an opportunity. So we sort of jumped around here a little bit, and I'm happy to keep taking questions. Possibly covered most of this around the advanced monitoring framework. So it really is to better understand what's happening in the environment with that leachate plume. And we are also, in parallel to that, ensuring that as we get towards the end of the year and start to make decisions around the need to not do further work in extracting leachate, it would allow us to then move forward with planning for a complementary wetland in the downstream catchment of that of the landfill. So we did a 2-day site visit in late April, and we took a number of the community around, and it was a great opportunity to go around and visit all the bore sites for some that hadn't been to site, but also for Tongan and Taylor to familiarise themselves. We've continued to engage with Lake Trust, NLG, PMG, and obviously Horizons, because we have got an existing compliance issue, which is around the abatement notice for what was called the BPO. And so during a number of conversations, we've had acceptance from Horizons that the approach we've taken is the correct one and the most viable path, but we're pushing to get that written confirmation. But there is ongoing engagement, attendance at site visits, and also our regular hui with community that Horizon staff are attending. So there's just a couple of images. the guys here effectively, they get their steps up, they do it, walk across the site doing a big grid, and it's a form of geophysical testing. There's a number of other tools that were set up. I won't go into all that detail, but we intend to as we do present those findings, that we'll bring the experts along to talk to effectively what all those readings have told them. And then we see a few members of the community. This is the base of the landfill, so you can see the poplar trees that often are talked about in amongst the existing wetland growth. And I've possibly covered the majority of that as well. That in February, the formal letter was sent to Horizon summarising our work. There's been a number of meetings since, but we are yet to get that formal communication back from Horizons accepting our position. Next couple of slides really just, we use AMF, Advanced Monitoring Framework, WP, Wetland Enhancement Plan, just really highlighting that all of this work kicked off in March, and we expect to see throughout the rest of this year more detail coming, and that's around concepts of what we could do with a wetland. The wetland support we've got has been involved in a number of wetland projects across the country, including in wastewater and landfill type scenarios. So there's a finite level to what you can achieve. Wetlands are quite expensive, as we know, with the Aotearoa wetland, and there's a finite level to the treatment they can achieve. So we are looking to try and find the happy medium and do that really early on and get test council law's appetite for level of investment into a wetland enhancement program before we get to the end of a project to say we've got a $5 million project. Can we push the button on this? We'll be looking to, as soon as possible, step elected members through the likely scenarios and options. There's also a range of engagement that's happening with PMG and NLG throughout this process. We are required to have a meeting with NLG every 12 months, but throughout the last few years, those have been happening quite regularly, similar with the PMG. We know that as we move into the next phase with the revised consent conditions, we'll look to reframe how those relationships work and focus, knowing that this isn't management over an open landfill. The landfill's now closed. How do we all move forward? But continue to engage with Lake Horowhenua Trust, who obviously have a key interest, iwi partners, and wider landowner and interested community members. So that engagement is ongoing. There's always a opportunity for elected members to attend those hui, and we'll continue to provide that opportunity. So current status, site visit's been completed. We've put an application in to go and drill some more boreholes because we want to find a little bit more information from the groundwater. We are awaiting the results from the site visits, so we don't actually have the findings from those, and we'll share those with community. We won't look to provide a lot of this technical information in real time to elected members. We'll look to try and chunk that off and bring that back at key intervals. But with community, we'll regularly be sharing as that information comes available. Also planning to complete a stream survey this month, and the consent application for the landfill to move from an open landfill to a closed landfill is in progress. And I'll at this point look to hand over to Phil. Not sure whether you can see the slides all right there, Phil?
Yeah, I can see those. Yes,
yes.
yes.
Happy to just talk us through the next few slides?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. Okay.
So, there's the question of why a need for a new resource consent. So just stepping back a little bit, last year we started a review of the current resource consent and the discharge permits, and that was under Section 127 of the RMA. And the reason for that was a recognition that because the landfill was closed, there were a whole heap of consent conditions that really were no longer needed. For instance, all the consent conditions around disposal of different types of wastes, they weren't needed at all. And so, the slide has changed. I don't know if you want to go back to the previous one. Yep, okay. And we went down the track of looking at varying all of the consent conditions or those that needed to be changed. And you probably find that it was like 70% of the consent conditions needed changing. And we took that approach to Horizons and said, we want to look at varying the consents. And the recommendation from Horizons was essentially that rather than go through a section S27, 127 review of the existing consents, it would be better to apply for a new resource consent under section 104. And this allows Horizons to basically grant a consent for a controlled activity, and the controlled activity being a closed landfill. So we have changed direction, and essentially we are now applying under section 104 for a new consent for a closed landfill. And what we've done is we've taken all of the consent conditions that we did change and we were looking at amending, and we've included those as proposed conditions under the new application. We can go on to the next one if you want. Yeah. I mean, this is just a little kind of mantra that we had, which is essentially saying that, we recognise that council has closed the gate on disposing of the waste through the council agreement or the council decision. By changing the resource consent conditions, we essentially lock that gate. And I think this was something that we put to the NLG, and I think it was accepted that, yes, this is a good way to go. Yeah. This basically highlights all of the changes that are being proposed, and it is a bit of a reflection on what we were looking at varying of the existing resource consents, but by the same token, it's applicable to the new proposed conditions for the closed landfill application. So as I mentioned, there are a whole heap of conditions relating to acceptance of waste, which we don't need. There are a number of conditions relating to reporting requirements, which should be amended, both for the scope of what we need to report on and also the timing around the reporting, because the timing kind of varied for different discharge permits, and we've brought them all into line to make sure that the reporting all occurs at the end of September. We've looked at changing some of the operating conditions for the landfill gas flare. So the current consent condition stated that essentially it said that the flare had to operate continuously. And there's a recognition that the flare has an operational capacity that varies from quite low, 50 cubic meters per hour, up to a top rating of 500 cubic meters per hour. Now, what will happen at the landfill, and we've already seeing it, is that as the waste decomposes and the gas gets produced, so the gas yield will drop off, and we'll get to a stage where the gas yield will drop below the operating capacity of the flare. And at that point, if we didn't change the consent condition, we'd be in contravention of the condition. So we've changed that condition to basically say that it needs to be in line with the practical operating conditions of the flare. Then there are other conditions that we're looking at changing around the landfill gas and the odour monitoring. With the landfill having been capped, there's no need now to essentially do the extensive monitoring for odour that was required previously. There was monthly checks at the boundary and so on, and there was monthly checks over the surface of the landfill. So all of those can be reduced quite considerably. And there were also monitoring requirements for stormwater soakage and the groundwater and surface water monitoring, which could be reduced as well.
Yeah, so a whole lot of rules, Phil, to just ensure into the future and aftercare we may remain good custodians of the environment. So these are effectively setting those rules for us. There's limited interest and excitement from the wider community, given that it's a closed landfill. There's an assumption that there's nothing happening there. However, there is still that liability the work required to maintain that in a first site. And there is a small area of the community that have a particular interest in Hokio that this is a really important aspect too. So it's the excitement level for the wider community, it's probably not of interest, but for a specific community, it's really important that we've allowed the opportunity for everyone to understand what council's proposing and effectively those rules that will be set in place to take us into the future. So the next slide really just covers off the engagement process we've been going through, and really at a high level the message that we expect to go through a consenting process this year and land with a decision towards the end of the year. Question from Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for the report. Just, you mentioned that horizons are part of the visits and site visits and things because we've got a compliance issue. And sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on this. In the proposed changes to the consent conditions around the landfill from open to closed, is it one of those conditions that you're looking to change that will deal with that non-compliance? That's my first question. The other one's a small technical question. How many hectares is the Tardana block that you're looking to establish wetland on?
I'll answer the last one first. There's an area of 2 to 3 hectares that would lend itself to doing something, and it depends whether we do something just with a big drain that skirts around and directly cuts across, or we kind of expand that out because a large area of that site has already been filled with clean fill, so we wouldn't be looking to remove that. Perhaps get Phil to just talk to the interface between what we may find out in the BPO, or the investigation process around the advanced monitoring framework, and how that would interface into the closed landfill to allow work to happen in the future if required.
Phil, can you hear us?
Yeah.
So in short, we are looking to remove the time constraints around an assumption of a BPO, knowing that there's further work.
An issue relating to non-compliance. Can you just expand a little bit?
But we might have a bit of a delay here, perhaps.
Oh, yeah, it's cut off there. Yeah.
It will resolve it. Because it's currently we're non-compliant, and the best practical option through investigation has turned out to not be a practical option. And it's this thing of delivering something in hindsight. Then through this investigation, it's been determined that there isn't a justifiable investment in that solution required right now, and that the work we're doing with the monitoring will determine if something is required and what it would need to be. And so that'll be all wrapped up and covered in that consent process. And potentially, if in the future we did find there was an issue and some intervention, it would require a further consent. So that's part of the cost and the challenge with that BPO. It's a consent to remove a wetland, then have to put an offset. There'd be consents for groundwater extraction. So the consenting cost on that estimate for the groundwater extraction was more than the physical works cost itself. So there's a significant volume work in the consent. So if there was significant other projects planned, they would need a subsequent consent. This one is really just to put the lock on the gate to confirm the community, yes, it is closed, and that the level of work we need to do to manage the site is at the appropriate level for a closed landfill. So clean filling, large other projects, they would then require another consent.
That's the point I'm keen to, and if you want to park it for another conversation another day, happy. But don't want to open Pandora's box. But we do have an outstanding council resolution that is around considering future activities at that landfill site. And it was always my understanding, and I mean, we spent hours debating and discussing and asking questions around this over years, around that because of the way in which the consent was going to change from open to closed, that there was no benefit of. There was always going to have to be a new consent for a new activity, and there was no benefit in terms of trying to use the existing consent to kind of shape or be a vehicle to make that decision around future use. But because of the change in direction where we're actually applying for a new consent for a closed landfill, it would seem to me that there would be some inefficiencies now created where if we were to then have to apply for another consent to actually do another activity on that site, why wouldn't we reflect on putting aside the community expectation for just, but if there was mandate from the table to go, actually, yeah, we really want to explore this idea of the clean fill, why wouldn't we structure it in a way that the consent application that we're now applying for would include that as an add-on, rather than having to do two separate consenting processes that potentially carry more cost, more steps? Like, surely there's some efficiency to be gained by doing the two pieces together, and also then giving community confidence around that we're doing what we said we'd do in terms of the future, but limiting it to probably some activities which are more acceptable, because there was some future activities that were just totally off the table from a community perspective. But yeah, if this feels like a kind of a missed opportunity to kind of deal with that decision.
Good question. Real initial thoughts is around timing of certainty, and it's something that we have had a conversation with members of community to test that appetite, even ahead of coming to council, to say would we consider going down this path to consent to clean fill operation, knowing that would be a significant there'd be a significant amount of effort that would need to be done in terms of investigation of that and ground truthing the viability of the site for that, understanding the ability to have a commercial operation to manage that, and at what scale. There'd have to be a fair amount of work to investigate that, knowing that this is a process that needs to be completed to put the lock on the gate, and so there's just a risk of clouding and drawing out that process, and this does provide the opportunity to resolve the compliance risks around the old consent that do actually need to be updated. And yes, we can complete the investigation work, but we've still got this consent sitting there that says that we've got an open landfill and we need to do a whole lot of monitoring, and there's costs associated with additional work around that as well. I'm happy to go away. I'm happy to go away and frame that up into a more solid view around what those two scenarios could look like to continue on the current path versus relook at really it's opening up all options for site, not just a specific option. So that would require a further stream of work that hasn't been progressed, because at the moment the focus has been on ensuring there isn't environmental harm. It's been addressing the legacy issues with community and the site, and trying to get that lock on the gate as efficiently as possible. And the message is that this new application process is quite straightforward, because we're not proposing anything other than just ensuring we're good stewards and we monitor the site. In summary, but absolutely can go away and have a look at what that could look like.
So I guess my question is, we've been talking about this for 4 years, and Sam's been hearing about it a lot longer than that in the lead up to the decision to close. We had BPO options that were in front of us. We chose another BPO option that now turns out isn't practical. We're not able to execute. One of the BPO options was simply encapsulating not only the top but the sides, We've had community voice that says we want to do the sides. We've got a compliance issue, and the compliance issue has said, essentially from what I understand, is you haven't done a BPO option, so you're breaching that compliance. Surely encapsulating the sides meets the BPO option that addresses the compliance issue. And I guess what I'm not quite hearing is just a robust case that there would not be, there's no environmental harm occurring, or that encapsulating the sides wouldn't be beneficial in some way to reducing any harm. Because when I think about it practically, leachate, from what I understand, is generated from water. Water generally is groundwater or from the sky. It falls. We've kept the top, but we haven't kept the sides. We're not seeing a huge plume that gives you concern, or the scientists, when I say, a huge concern around how quickly it's going. But surely capping the sides helps to mitigate or further reduce any leachate that may still be being produced. So I guess my question is capping the sides, does it land us where we wanted to ultimately land in terms of in a compliance space, able to move on?
It wouldn't help us with the compliance space. So the BPO, and this is where best practical option, it's effectively a checklist. So these aren't developed solutions. It's just looking through a range of options and saying, what are the pros and cons? Let's settle on this one. Ballpark, there's an estimate. We've gone through a process to investigate it. The concerns at the start around ability to treat that if it was distracted, that wasn't a new challenge, but we obviously identified that alongside additional cost to build a whole new wetland because we're going to damage one. And then the technical work associated with developing that option highlighted that there wasn't an existing impact on the Horowhenua stream. So we actually gathered more evidence through investigating that BPO option. Yes, it didn't get taken right through to consenting and completion. And so that then became the regulatory challenge that would signal to community and Horizons, yes, we've got a plan, we're going to go and deliver something. We haven't, and even when we started on that journey, we were already behind by a number of years delivery of that solution. So in some ways, and this is where there's a little bit of conjecture around the determination of the BPO, in 2023 when we determined that the capping on the top of the landfill wasn't up to scratch, it was a logical step. Within a period of months, council threw $500,000 at that site and recapped the entire top of that landfill. But the technical advice at the time was we can't justify doing this further work to cap the sides, knowing that that further side capping is a significant undertaking in terms of benching right down to the site disturbance of wetlands. It's just that the activity associated with that and the additional cost. The technical advice that council's receiving, and we know that members of the community hold different views and interpret the data in a different way, is that there's not a justifiable investment right now. It's not to say we couldn't do it, but the decisions on the council table that have been made in the lead up to where we are was that we wouldn't move forward with that. However, the work that was committed in November around additional monitoring may throw up more evidence to say yes, we should do something, because the plume is still the concern. But the theory is yes, logically you would cap the sides if we were back in 2002. However, that times move on, and the evidence, they can't justifiably say that it would actually help the situation. Therefore, we would probably struggle to determine it met the threshold as a BPO currently. And we want to answer this question conclusively alongside community to ensure that we actually have alignment on this, because we don't have alignment today.
So I'm going to bring you all the way back to right at the beginning, just because I hear what Councillor Jenny's saying, and that it sounds really nice that the whole plan, the current plan, is to get solid evidence. But you made a comment that the implication is possibly that disturbance of the wetland, which has now been in place for nearly 20 years, could end up being a can of worms. That there could be contamination in there, that it's slowly cleaning itself, and therefore the evidence will show a way forward whether extending or capping is the way to go.
No, the comment relating to the wetland is purely acknowledging that if there was an impact from capping or from extracting groundwater, so effectively draining the wetland, it's no longer a wetland, we would need to go and compensate the environment by locating a wetland somewhere else. So that would, the estimates were $1.5 million around that really weren't foreseen, because the assumption in that PPO process was if there's a serious environmental issue, we can dig a trench, we can extract the groundwater out because the groundwater is bad. However, when we've gone and looked at the consenting processes, it's actually saying, well, there's a thriving environment, yes, there's leachate, but by removing the water, you damage that contaminated wetland and you need to go and build one somewhere else. And so those are where the costs compounded in that investigation, and why a decision was made to say let's pause on that, because we also don't have capacity in the next 4 years at the wastewater treatment plant or the pot to accept that leachate. And the environmentalists are telling us, well, actually the environment is currently managing that at the current site. So we could create a worse effect by piping it off to the Waiwiri stream. And, that's sort of where the investigation landed. So that certainly has been parked for the time being. If this monitoring framework throws up more concerns about that leachate plume, we're going to have to come up with another solution. We can't, surmise on what that might be and spend time until we actually better understand the site's current conditions. So that was the commitment made in the advanced monitoring framework. That was saying, yes, this information is telling us something, but we need to plug some more gaps. We need to better understand it. We need to determine if action is required. Because at the moment, we hear the concerns from the community, don't wait till it's too late. But we don't actually have the evidence to say this is required, this is when it's required, and this is what we need to do. And it's this mystery. It's the unseen that's underneath, and it's trying to get an understanding of that. And there's a lot of concern and views around it that we understand.
If I could just kind of build on that, and for those of you who were here when the decision was made to close the landfill, and for those that are newer to this important conversation, just to remind the table that we were always clear it was not kind of spray and walk away. So it wasn't as simple as closing the landfill and forgetting about it. And that really sat at the heart of the creation of the landfill legacy rate, which Council consulted with the community on as part of the long-term plan to ensure that there was sufficient funding, not for 1 or 2 years, but over a long period of time, to ensure that as we understood more about how we put things right, that the funding was available to do that. And I understand the frustration and also maybe the impatience, like how do we just get there, and particularly acknowledge the community. And you've received some correspondence from some community members over the last couple of days who are eager for the landfill to be fully capped, and acknowledge that they've been consistent in their messaging around that. But also just remind the table that our advice has also been consistent, that you have said to us, don't recommend things that don't reflect good investment on behalf of the ratepayer, and we can't, as professionals and officers, recommend that you spend this money because we don't have enough evidence to say it's going to achieve anything. And I appreciate that our community have a different view on that, and that's why it's so important we stay committed to this partnership via the PMG and the NLG around the monitoring framework, because the monitoring framework is about putting those guardrails in place so that if an orange flag appears, we understand what data and information that is telling us so that we are then prepared and positioned to respond to that, knowing that we won't need to be reactive because council have established that landfill legacy rate, which ensures that the funding is available so that council have the permission to implement and invest when and as required without that triggering significance and requiring a long-term plan or a long-term plan amendment in itself. So you have been thinking long-term, you have been thinking big picture, and what we're just trying to do in balancing all of this is making sure we don't spend money on something that's not going to deliver an outcome for the ratepayer.
Can I just say, I do appreciate you continuing those discussions with the community, and I know this is a frustrating process for you, and it's been a very long process for the council as well. But I really say thank you, and I'm very glad that we are continuing to have those close communication and discussions with the community, especially moving forward once we get some more information about what's happening and if things change. So that's one thing for me that was really important, and I just want to say thank you, and if we can keep that conversation going, that's really important. So thank you.
Yeah, it's not frustrating. The community is obviously frustrating, wants answers, wants certainty, wants the safety for concerns around the environment. So yeah, absolutely, we share those concerns. There's some alignment on outcomes. The time that's taken to get there is obviously acknowledged. Yeah. So if there's no,
Dan, sorry, just a heads up that through the long-term plan process, the one pager on the money that we've spent, the money that we've got planned to spend on the debt, all those sorts of things would, I think, be helpful to give everybody a little bit more context in terms of some of the decisions that we're about to make. It doesn't have to be in depth, but just high level type of thing.
Great suggestion. Noted. Thank you.
Any last questions? Cool. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Ashley, are you ready? Cool. Sweet. Do you want 5 minutes? 5-minute break, guys. All right, it's 4 o'clock. Are you ready to go, Ash? Ready to go? Cool. I'd just like to invite you guys to the table and please begin.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Young. As we start this Future Fit workshop, first of all, I'm very pleased to be here with Dan, Ashley and Alison as we will take you through it today. We also appreciate that it's been a busy day as well. And so as we start, we'd like to just drop into this discussion by coming back to the beginning, to the environment that we're working in for our Future Fit discussions. And that is an environment where Council's developing a long-term plan that's evolutionary rather than revolutionary. What we know is that Central District Waters will start operating from the 1st of July 2027. That the government has indicated that councils should have preparation for amalgamation front of mind instead of rates capping. The Head Start backstop process both connects to and yet is separate from the LTP. We know that there are matters within activities which Council has signalled over the last year or so that could or should be considered during the LTP. That means that the context we prepare the LTP in is one of preparing for the removal of 3 waters, preparing Council for amalgamation, addressing key issues Council needs to resolve regardless of reform. And that little asterisk by rates capping was related to timing. We know legislation's coming, but it's been signalled that it would be enforced from the 1st of July 2029, whereas the Head Start backstop processes are expected from the 1st of July 2028.
So recapping on where we are, since pivoting the Future Fit roadmap to look from a Head Start position, just a reminder that we have and are developing principles, so what is important to Council for any Head Start backstop discussions. We've been looking at community outcomes, what's important to our community, and this also crosses over to the long-term plan process as well. We've been looking at the LTP timeframe, and you'll get more of that today. We've talked about community conversation, which actually goes live tomorrow, and then also you've had a little bit of homework around level of service sheet, which we will go through today. So the purpose of today's workshop is to check what we've heard from you around the Head Start backstop principles, so check on those. Also to share the detailed long-term plan, project timeline and overview. Check in around the community outcomes. As a collective, you've done some fantastic work, and we just want to test that with you and see if there is anything missing or if there is anything else, noting that the themes will be part of the early community conversation. And then we delve into the levels of service. We will be looking at those areas that have been highlighted within the sheet and the homework that some of you have completed. And so in the no, see, do triangle, today we're in the no and see in relation to the long-term plan timeline and the process, but we are in the do, in the check-in for the Head Start backstop principles, the community outcomes, and then also the levels of service changes. So we are going to cover off the principles and just check in with you in relation to those.
You'd think I would have learned. So this is where we started. We then, very fast, and with a bit of pushing and shoving, we came through to what we think we heard last week, which is a slightly more finessed version of those that we will ultimately use to bring back to you an assessment of the options that come forward as part of the Head Start process. Knowing that there is more than just this that you'll consider, but these are the principles, these are the objectives against which we can test the options. Does the options put forward enable growth of Horowhenua? What is the impact on our services, efficiency, resilience, what is the impact on affordability for the community, financial sustainability of that entity, whatever that is, and how do we retain local voice and identity in that proposed option or options, and how does it differentiate? One more chance to check that this reflects the feedback from you over the last couple of weeks about what's important to Horowhenua and what matters. Let's see.
I think the only thing that I was reflecting on is under the affordability for community and council sustainability, whether there's a concept of fairness that needs to be built into it, because how we define fairness will differ around the table as well. So, because some people say it's more fair to go for a user pays type model, or that land value rating is fairer than capital value, whereas others will say other things. But I think that's an important component of potentially that principle, because when we're comparing ourselves with other entities, we're going to take into account about, it's not just affordability, but it's about how they cost recover, or how they distribute the cost of the service and the function. And so I think that that's a relevant consideration. So I think fairness is the right word for it, but it requires us to also then define affordability and fairness. So it's doubly sword, right?
It is. Information about how services are paid for or funded, that would be relatively accessible. Yeah, so we could certainly bring that through.
Yeah, it's probably more of a judgment around, like, so for example, we have a land value rating approach for the general rate, and I think it would be a major consideration for us around if our partners took a different approach and that was a bottom line for them, that we would adapt to their model. And so, yeah, I don't know how we do it, but that's the kind of practical scenario that I'm trying to signal.
So if I could add to that, if we're talking about fairness, we need to think about where we stop in terms of those underpinning things. Why identify fairness only? Why not ability to pay? Why not those other things as well? So I personally prefer the affordability thing to sit where it stands, knowing that we will be required anyway under the Ratings Act or whichever piece of legislation to consider a number of things, including that, and including ability to pay. So I'd push back, because my argument is if we start with that, where do we stop at this stage in the process?
Yeah, that's a bit. I'll let
Just before we keep going on this, Dan, can I just get you to maybe comment on, if we think about Councillor Jennings, that would be a big issue if it was a bottom line. I think that was your language, or something along that lines.
Yeah.
Just kind of in the frame of let's be real about amalgamation, it won't be our call. It will be then. I just want us to manage our expectations about what we actually control in this situation, and under an amalgamated council, it will be the decision making of a future council that will determine if we're land value or capital value. I don't know if we can bind a future amalgamated authority to that.
No, you couldn't. They would make a choice. I think the sort of provision of information about your potential partners and the similarities and differences between them is something that we can get together relatively quickly for you, so that you can, in a sense, decide which options are not for you, so that whatever option is the best one stays on the table right through for you to start to make some of those decisions and discussions with your neighbours. But your chief executive's right. Everything, every service level, and every service and every part about that will ultimately be for a future council table to decide.
Can I get the toss on this just quickly? Sorry, mind if I just, because it's all about outlook, right? Though partners, because we're defining an outlook here. We're not saying that we're trying to bind, but we're saying, like, why would you go into a relationship if two partners are completely at odds in terms of their outlook and views? That's my point. It's not, because you're just setting yourself up for failure or disappointment.
Dan, I guess my question is, I don't just disagree with what we've put up there. My question is assessment of options and weightings, and I don't necessarily recall if we've had that conversation as a table around these are the principles, but does one carry more than the other? And how would as officers, would it be useful to have an idea of a weighting aspect of each of these points to help with information coming back, or is it by the by?
Ordinarily, I would say yes. In fact, I would say the sooner you do it, the better, before we even talk about options, because otherwise you start to close your minds off. But given that we know ultimately the decision will be made by the government using their criteria, and they are the only criteria that ultimately matter for a decision, here it is going to be the best decision you can make for what your best partnership is, along with them also wanting to be your partner. So we're trying to meld the good decision-making principles with the practical reality of where we're at.
I guess what I'm not seeing are what the long-term community outcomes are in those four, unless I'm missing it. I just want to know, what are we trying to actually create over the long term in terms of our community and in terms of the wider district, and what are the real conditions of the district. Otherwise, if we're ignoring those lived realities and what the community actually needs, it's kind of disconnected from who we are as a wider community, and it becomes based on finances and how we operate as a council, and that's not all a council is supposed to represent for its community.
Alongside these that you would use to help decide, you're going to have information about the communities of interest, so the economic, social and cultural connections of the different options and what those look like, where people live, where they go to work, the economic connections between them, cultural, social makeup of the communities and how well aligned they are. So that will be a body of evidence that comes through to you. But normally communities of interest is about how you represent that around the council table. But we're also using it here to say, well, how similar are these communities? And while you might be very similar to your neighbour, the next one over might be more similar to them, and then all the way over. And at some point, you might look at them and say those communities are actually quite different. So I don't think we're forgetting about the underlying communities at all. And then there is also, you said the information you wanted to see was like the strategies, the economic alignment, all of those things will also be coming back for the information pack, I guess, on each option, we could call it. Does that answer your question?
Thank you for that, Dan, for adding that, because I'm going to be very pragmatic here. And the fact that I'm struggling a little bit, I have no problem with what we're doing, and I look forward to adding the weighting. But if we choose ABC councils and our community tells us CDE, the government still at the end is going to come back and go A, C and F. So, yeah, coming back to what Monique said earlier, is our expectations could be just sitting a bit way too high, is what I'm seeing.
Dan, thanks for your response to my question. So on a flipper to you, so based upon these principles that we've agreed to, how would the government in their decision making rate these in order or weight these in order? Best guess.
the government has said they're very focused on the efficiency of the services and service delivery. They have focused in on the alignment with the new planning regime. So that's very much in there. And I've forgotten the other two, but they retention of local voice and identity. There's another one, and the other one is I have to find it, but they fit in there. But I guess these are your expression of those, because ultimately, yes, the government will make a decision, but the decision they make will be a blend of the thing that they've put out there, the policy, and the intent that they want, and the reality of what they can get back, and how far they keep to the strict criteria that they have set, and what they are willing to accept as trade-offs. Reduce duplication and make decision-making clearer is the other one of these. We are going to just move on because the LTP part of this workshop was the core of the session. But just before we do, I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate all the hard work you did on the community outcomes. I'm actually genuinely impressed. One, that you all got yourself together on the weekend to do it, and with what you put out. I've been working with local government long enough to sometimes be a bit cynical about it, but I'm genuinely impressed with what you've done. So well done, and on behalf of your community, thank you.
Right, and we are going to start looking at our LTP timeline and process in detail. So as we start there, I've actually been reflecting on the first time I came and presented to this council during your inductions, and then I talked about how strategic planning, how annual plans and long-term plans, we produce documents, but it's not just about creating documents. They're what comes in the middle point of the process that pulls together the directions set by yourselves, by council, pulls together financial information, external factors like population growth, government reforms, and community feedback for you to make decisions on and to determine council's strategic direction. Adoption of those documents launches the next step, enabling delivery of what matters to the council and the community, and to deliver on our legal requirements. So coming to the purpose of the long-term plan, it is to describe the activities of the council, describe the community outcomes the council's district is working towards, to provide integrated decision-making and coordination of council's resources, provide a long-term focus for the decisions and activities of council, and provide a basis for accountability of council to the community. We then move into connecting the purpose into the process. And the components of the LGA process do translate into process stages that we work through to create the long-term plan. Community outcomes are a piece that we do right at the start, like you've started discussing, as part of direction setting. Integrated decision making, coordinating resources with a long-term focus come through in determining the budget and policy settings. These come together to describe the activities council delivers and provide accountability to the community through consultation, and then through adoption to form the plan to be delivered on and reported on. All of this is done within that environment that we're working within, about removing the three waters from this long-term plan, looking ahead to amalgamation and preparing council and the community for that, and to address key issues that council needs to address regardless of reform. We then draw this through each of these process stages, the legally required components, and the response to the environment pieces into this long-term plan process. And so you've got a jigsaw that put together to step you through what you will see when between now and next June. So we're here right up in the top left-hand corner, working on one of the cornerstones, one of the corner pieces of the long-term plan, the community outcomes and key issues. There's no workshop on this next week, but then in June, we're going to be holding some workshops to really hone in on finances, how to use financial policies and tools, and direction setting. And Alison will speak more about this later on in the workshop. In July, we'll come back to you with the feedback from the community conversation and also start having activity discussions. These will be informed by the level of service discussion today, and Ashley and Dan will talk to you more about that shortly. Through July to November, we're in the budget and policy settings stage, looking at financials, further levels of service and budget options. We'll have a post-election check-in to see whether we confirm or change the direction. And working towards December, as has been our practice, to seek your endorsement of key issues and to agree the budget for consultation before Christmas. We'll also be asking you to adopt some of the earlier policies that we will be working on. In 2027, starting in January, we'll be working towards consultation. So while in the background we'll be preparing consultation documents, workshops with you will focus on developing the options to ask the community about. We'll be looking at how consultation is run, events, and how you lead through that process. You'll adopt the material for consultation, and then in early March it goes through its first audit. Following that, we have the 4-week consultation period, including oral submissions, and there'll be room to look at how we do that and how we can make it more accessible for the community. From there, it heads towards adoption. Officers will take the information that's gathered through consultation and bring that, the evidence, data and other information that you've had through the process, and present it to you for your use in deliberations in the decision-making stages. Then there's the final audit, and then you'll be asked to first adopt the fees and charges, doing it early again so that we can get ready for dog registration. And then towards the later part of June, adopt the long-term plan and set rates. Does anyone have any questions about anything there as we get started? We'll come back to this picture right throughout the whole process. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so thankfully, you as a team took the mashup of outputs from last week and worked on this over the weekend. Now, I understand not everybody was part of that, but a large group of councillors was. So you've got this as a handout as well as up on the slides. This is about testing that and making sure you're comfortable enough about the top line first of all, then the second line, because those are the things that your officers want to start to use as part of the consultation process. There will be ongoing wordsmithing of some of the finer bullet points. We don't need to do all of that now, but obviously we want to resolve the one where we're not quite sure about whether it's promise or progress. But I'm going to ask for a reflection from everybody on the headline: people, place, partnerships, and at the moment the double P. Are we all comfortable with that? And do we have suggestions for which one of those two P's might get dropped off? One of those P's gets dropped off.
I will start because I don't like either of them, although I can live with progress, but I cannot live with promise because I think that word is too many things to too many people, and it just leaves us wide open from our governance role. And my suggestion had been actually planning. If you're going to stay with the P, because I understand the concept, and that was the P word that I came up with, planning, but I can live with progress. But yeah, I think promise can bite us, and the same with the next line, taking out the word promise.
Ditto that.
Sorry, I missed that, Councillor Young.
Ditto.
Oh, okay. Any other comments? You're uncomfortable with?
We did play with the word potential, but
just a query about the promise progress one. So I can see the people, place and partnerships. My question is whether, call it promise or progress, whatever, whether in fact those are things which feed into those other three P's. In other words, are they not things which will sit under each of those three themes? Do you see what I mean? It's sort of like it's doing a different job. So I just asked because I was not part of that discussion. So the advocates for progress, can you tell me why we need that fourth pillar, whereas identifying those things which currently sit under it, identifying them as sort of as feeding into the actual outcomes that we want to achieve under the people, place and partnerships?
I think when we had the discussion and Clint brought in this fourth pillar, and I thought it was brilliant, was the need for us to have measurables and outcomes, because you can have really lovely language and you can incorporate the ideas and the ideological side of it, but then how do you actually what are your measurables? How can you ensure that you're actually delivering what you want to deliver? And that's where that idea of that promise comes in. Well, this is what we will try and achieve as we're moving forward. So it's trying to pinpoint a little bit more and move us in a better direction in terms of what we're actually going to achieve.
And not that it's my opinion really matters on this, but Horowhenua is a growth area, and that is not the same as everywhere else in New Zealand. And you have been talking about growing for a while, and you have some real enablers and drivers of growth going on. And I think people place partnership, that could be anywhere. I think the progress stuff is what gives you the full gambit of what's going on in Horowhenua.
I can certainly see there are some of those boxes that just didn't seem to want to fit in either of those three headings, so I could understand bringing in the fourth pillar. But there's a couple there which give me concern, and I'm going to Councillor Allen's wording of where do you start and where do you stop with better social outcomes. We are not a social service. We are governance. So I struggle with that box. I understand the intent of what we want to do for our community, but putting that into the big picture again, and the same with progressing prosperity, again, not quite the wording. Those are the two things that I had trouble with, the wordings. Everything else I thought was an amazing piece of work.
Can I just keep us to the top two boxes first? Because if you can agree those, then that's a major step forward.
So just to build on what others have said, because I was at that meeting, and Clinton and Bernie spoke really quite well in favour of this fourth column, and they persuaded me that there was some things that underneath that didn't fit kind of neatly into other places, but it's the whole idea of that. Ideally, the pillar would actually be called change, but we were looking for a P word because it's about change. That's what we're ultimately as a community we do want to change. We want to get better. We want to evolve. And this is through the lens of community. This isn't about what council will deliver. This is about saying, as a community, what's important. We all want better social outcomes. We all want better local government. We all want all these prosperity, all that kind of stuff. And so just because I delved down, but like it's ultimately for me, it's about change, and it's about the realizing potential, realizing that promise, realizing the progress, and the piece that really convinced me that we needed the fourth pillar, and that it's the concept of change, was Bernie's comment that this set of community outcomes, the power in them or the importance of them is actually in the short term, because usually these community outcomes could be the same for 50 years, right? But actually what we want to do is bring some Horowhenua flavour that says, actually this pillar is so important to us at the moment. There's a whole lot of stuff that's that could bring such good and change to the district. We actually need it there, and to expressly signal that that's important to us. So, yeah, maybe the better label is change. It doesn't sit without other P's, but yeah, I think it's the concept.
Yeah, look, I align with the 3 Ps. I would keep to promise, because I think from the lens that this is written for our community and what this council will deliver for our community, I'm comfortable sticking with promise. It was really born out of, I couldn't quite describe it, but not everything kind of fitted. And to Bernie's point, you could look at people, place and partnership, and you'd be reading KCDC's current custom community outcomes right now. So it was about having a space for being able to articulate or have some Horowhenua uniqueness to what we were putting on the table, which is kind of where we landed at. So, yeah, I'm happy with the top boxes. I have a preference for promise. Planning and progress are just a little bit less aspirational than promise.
Thank you for the work that you did, and I know I only fed in with a couple of brief phone calls, and this might be a bit woke, but did you consider possibility as a P word?
Look, I wanted to be a bit more specific about these. I don't want them just to be flowery, sort of fluffy outcomes that could apply to 67 councils around the country. I did want them to be more Horowhenua specific and actually, I suppose, challenges. And I remind everybody about when we were ready that, we need to be brave. We need to step up, and we've got some real challenges ahead of us in terms of everything we do. So I don't mind if this is about promise. I don't, I'm comfortable with that, because we need to make this community better somehow. And so if we've got specific aspirations that we want to make, that's where I think they should be.
And just in terms of the concern that council is not long-term plans about vision, objectives and strategy, and part of the long-term plan's goals is to transform lives in delivering of the priorities of the community, and part of that means that we've got to balance community needs with resources. So I just want to be really careful about saying, well, we're not really here to fix the community. We're not here to become a social whatever. But there is an element to that within the council, and there's an element of that within the long-term plan. And I'm still really conscious that I don't want this to become a financial kind of pathway that we're looking down only, that we do need to keep in mind what the community's desires, needs and wants are as part of this.
Can I just ask you, did you say LTP is to transform lives.
Yeah, that's what it's at. That's what it's at. We'll be looking it up. We'll be looking at go to the local government New Zealand, do all the work we want to do about it, when it has a framework. That's what it's at.
I'm going to draw us back because we're trying to get to a position quite quickly. I'm hearing more for progress than promise. Sorry, Clint. Are we comfortable leaving progress as the one? We can't go out to commute with a line down the middle.
I prefer possibility over progress.
Yeah. Okay. Right. It's not a decision. It's a workshop, but we've got that, Joe. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to make captain's rules, but possibility to me is a bit weak and yeah.
It's just community conversation.
Yeah.
Possibility. Do you want it over another possibility? So you've got one vote, it's on. 3.
Not to interject,
yeah,
but just to remind you all that this is just to go out with some early community conversation. It is not a decision making, and it's not the adoption. So there is definitely ability to change wording as we go through the process.
Maybe it'd be helpful just to define what we think those two are and moving forward for future discussions.
Well, I think you've defined them because it's what is underneath those. It's just the headline here. What is the word that sits over the top? Okay, I'm going to give you 5, maybe 10 minutes if you want to talk about the detail. If you want to flag ones that you think need some attention, and your officers can look at them.
So I'm just going to jump in really early and then I'll shut up. Is the only thing that's potentially missing is a point that Morgan raised last week, which is just this whole, and I've already talked about the concept of the fairness, like the user pays right through to that principle of ability to pay that then David mentioned, and I think it's the concept of fairness or something like that. That's about how do you skin the cat, how do you this is one phrase, but yeah, how do you, and so it kind of sits in that people column, affordable and right-sized government. It just needs another word in there that's with affordability and I thought fairness, but it's something else like that just needs to be captured there, and then it just is one word that captures the whole of the stuff.
I'm going to ask you for a little more definition, because fairness could be access to services, it could be what services are offered, it could be how much you pay, it could be differential in payment. There's lots of what do you can you get a bit further down on what you mean?
I think it really was building on what Morgan was saying. That was that the community to me always does talk about user pays. Like, I hate paying for stuff that, and I know that doesn't work 100% because we all pay taxes and we have fire stations and hospitals that we don't always use. But it's that concept of, and I don't know, user pays is the wrong language to go in there, but it's something that enables us to at least have the conversations or make the decisions. From a community perspective, it's around the concept of differing. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of another word other than fairness. Like that's the problem. Is I'm having a bit of trouble describing it, so I can't think of the right word. Morgan, I don't know if you.
I have a problem with it at this stage. I think it needs to stay the way it is, because Sam said before that you ask the community and they'll say they don't want to pay for things they don't use. It's about user pays. I absolutely know that there are huge sections of the community that say we believe we should be part of a society where all people have access to certain things regardless of their ability to pay. So this is a much deeper discussion, which is around, our financial, whatever the term is, financial strategy thingy, funding and whatever. I think I've put that very well. So for now, I really want to stick with affordability, the wording that's currently there. Interested to hear from others though.
Yeah, I'm actually the same. I think user pays kind of takes us down a slippery slope. We're people value. That's what the council is about. It's not a privatisation project. And I think when you're looking at things like library or assets or what have you, that is about the good of the community, not just about the good of the individual. And that's what I feel the council is there for. I've also got some.
Can I just respond to the conversation about fairness and user pays? Spoiler alert, there's going to be some sessions for you in June about the upcoming financial strategy, which will be about how do you pay for services and whether they are funded by everyone or their user pays and the mix of that and how that all works. So it's not that that's a different issue, but it's a live issue for a whole lot of things rather than necessarily belonging in here.
Equitable outcomes. What about that? Let me just give a bit of kōrero. Equitable outcomes are results that ensure all individuals have fair access, opportunities and resources to thrive, taking into account systemic barriers and historical disadvantages. Equitable outcomes go beyond treating everyone the same. They focus on fairness and justice in the results by recognising that people start from different circumstances and may require different levels of support to achieve similar results. So, I don't know, that came to mind as treating everyone on the same page, same level. Kia ora. Under people, at the very bottom where you've got trust in leadership, I'd love us to explore the word accountability under there. Under place of community vibrancy and amenity, people with disabilities is not really included in that. Inclusiveness is a word that I would be kind of supporting in terms of recognising that in our community. Under growth, housing, prosperity and opportunity in that place section. Community wellbeing is kind of missing in that. Environmental stewardship, underneath that, we're not looking at current and future generations and responsibility in terms of our natural environment. So I'd like to explore that. Partnerships, when we've got Mana Whenua and iwi, there's nothing there about supporting Māori aspirations. It's all about the wider community. So it's kind of taking away a lot of what our council role is providing that space for their aspirations. And and the bottom of that, purposeful local delivery arrangements. Again, for me, that community wellbeing kind of image is missing from that.
This is going to seem like I'm harping on it, but I just wanted to point out that if you had the word possibilities, the second box would be turning possibilities and opportunities into progress through growth, strategic action and future fit local government, which then makes the next box fit for purpose, their progressing prosperity. And then again, my only feedback is that I really can't live with better social outcomes, because I think that is covered by the other whole, everything in the other three boxes.
I think there's an important statement in there about community relationships, and I think it really strongly identifies that we are not all things to all people, that we are here as a council to empower lead agencies and organisations to do what they need to do in community, and we are just part of that connecting piece. I think we've got to be, we've learnt that and we've stated that we can't be seen as all things to all people, that we have genuine partnership roles. So I think that community relationships statement is critical there, that those organisations and groups are empowered to lead, that we're not seen as the lead. I think that, that really speaks to community well-being if we, take ourselves out of the equation a bit.
Your officers are furiously taking notes here, and they will do their best to bring this together. Remembering that this is not the finalisation of this. This is the getting the key bits that can go out and inform this first community engagement process. So you've got 2 more minutes on this.
Just another thing that I've picked up here is because council operates in a sort of, regulatory enforcement environment, so like our developers and things, I'd like to see something in here that says that when you deal with a council, you'll get a consistent response. So if you deal with Bill or Bob or Peter or Sandy, it's in the, consenting team, you'll get a consistent response. Like, so and when we do service delivery or whatever, it's a consistent response. I'd like to see something around that.
I'm just wondering, given the kind of things I've heard around the table, they're all things that are quite different, like things that are important to different people, that everyone wants elevated into these. I wonder if there's because all of the things that everyone's raised are actually things that underpin all of these, and so we don't actually need to capture every single word. And so maybe that the magic is in trying to get an agreed thing here where everyone's kind of comfortable with the language, acknowledging that sitting behind this, and we could publish it in a different way, like perhaps it could be something like factors influencing or contributing to the community outcomes, and we just show that more detail behind the scenes, because the things that Katrina's raised, the things Joe's raised, it's all important, and they have, whether you can see the words or not, influenced all these, and they all sit behind it. And I just wonder if that's maybe the better approach, because I know we're trying to narrow down through a kind of a thing, but yeah, anyway, you're absolutely right. We're looking for endorsement of the top 2 lines. Everything else is a work on from here. There's plenty of time to do that. So if we're putting possibility up the top and then putting that into the headline, turning possibility and opportunity into progress through growth, strategic action and future fit local government, have we got to a place where as a table you're comfortable with those 1, 2, 3, 4 headlines to go out to the community?
Acknowledging that you're going to hear a view from community that will help guide your further refinement of this.
Well done. Unfortunately, you've set the bar now for future LTP processes with a record within 1 week. Happily. Yeah, right. So the next bit is, I guess, getting through to the bit that was always envisaged as the main part of your LTP process this year, with all the challenges that were coming over the horizon. It was okay, you are going to get down to a services and service level discussion, because you are going to have to make such big changes to your LTP to ensure financial sustainability. We just didn't quite know everything that was coming over the horizon. So remembering that we are not needing to make that revolutionary change in the LTP, because we are not quite certain what's going to happen. So it is focused more on that evolutionary stuff for a couple of reasons. One of which is the uncertainty over what's happening on amalgamations. We're told that they're going to happen. We're told that they're happening on July 2028. That all centres on the government coming back in. There's still uncertainty around that. Still uncertainty about who your partners are. So making enormous step changes about what's provided to your community now is not the sensible move. The sensible move is doing the changes that still make sense, that you have no regrets over, and doing that in a kind of a strategic and measured way. So, what the process is here is to work out the ones that should be looked at now, and they've been called the now ones for obvious reasons. And then other ones that are identified that you would want to look into, but don't have quite the level of importance, being called the later ones. Doesn't mean they're being put away, just means they're being put in a different list that should the government not get return, you can come back to that. Should something else happen, they're still there for future reference, but you're separating those that you want your officers to focus on now for this LTP and those that you want put on the list but not forgotten about. Does that all make sense to everyone? Okay. All right, here we go. So I know you've all had a look through the list, the long spreadsheet. So that's good. So we're going to have a look at that. So what's going to happen is we're going to talk about the ones that you have identified now. It's not the time to agree that that is what the change is going to be, but as a group, we're asking for you to focus your officer attention time from here so that they can bring you back options in July for what those changes would be, what they mean for the costs of the service, what they mean for the users of the service, what might be some things that you didn't know about when you thought it was a good idea, what are the risks, how would you go about implementing it, and what are the trade-offs that are involved. So we're looking for some direction, so the next 2 months of your officer time is focused on what can realistically be done, and also a group that you want to see prioritised. So, from the spreadsheet that you were sent around, you identified 5 areas: aquatic facilities, community development, community facilities and services, property, rubbish and recycling. So those are the services where 4 or more said that you are willing to consider service changes on particular aspects of it. I'm going to give you my view that that's quite a broad range of things and quite a lot for your officers to do and come back within 2 months. I think that we might be able to refine that a little bit. And so that's what I'd like to think about and do for the next period of time. And what I guess I want us to think about is what we're trying to do through this process. What is the change we're looking to make? Are we still thinking about making that revolutionary change, or are we dialing it back a little bit to be more evolutionary? And I guess I mean by that, if a merger takes place with some of your neighbours, then the last thing you really want to have done is reduce the service level for your community, because that won't get changed again for a period of time, and your community could be worse off. So let's think about that. I'd also like to think about, in some aspects, you've identified things that I think are wastely funded. So rubbish and recycling, you identified a couple of areas. The trade waste education services and the waste minimisation and resource recovery advisory support as things that you were prepared to see a service level change on. Those are funded by the waste levy. So changing them doesn't necessarily change the cost your community bears. No, I think that would be in the information that comes back.
Can I just challenge you on something, Dan, before we get into this? Because your comment, and I know Monique's talked to us about this before as well, which is that if we cut a service now as part of the cycle, and then there's amalgamation, then the chances of getting it back is low. That's my paraphrasing. You articulate it better. But I just want to sort of test that, because if there is then amalgamation, harmonisation of rating approaches, then it's just not. Surely that's not going to fly from a new council or community perspective, that everyone's paying this in a harmonised model, and then there's subsidisation of an area or a council area that's got far better services. It's just not gonna fly. And so, isn't there still going to be a transition period where, like, I would imagine there'd be a transition period where the councils are going to go, well, what level of service do you provide? And then there would be harmonisation of services as well.
Yes, there will be. Yep, you're absolutely right. But that will take time, and that will be prioritised depending on what the council table thinks are the most important. And so the first thing a new council will do is just leave everything as they are while they work out what the most important decisions they need to make are.
Rates, because that's the big question, right? Like, because if the charging model stays the same for the individual councils, then there's no loss. It's only as if people all of a sudden pay more but get the same or less services.
What they did in Auckland is they brought in rates changed over a period of time to get towards it. There was a maximum change that could be made for a 3-year period, I think it was, so that it didn't jump too much. But you're right. It helped. You helped just narrow my understanding and lens. So.
I can give you a practical example, Councillor Jennings, through you, Councillor Young. So when Waikato absorbed part of the Franklin district, the roading networks were quite different. The Franklin part of the district that came in had a lower level of service, but a higher rate, whereas the Waikato, being a bigger entity, had a higher level of service with lower rates for that particular aspect. And over time, Dan's correct, we were given, I think it was 2 years to bring your rating mechanism and your policies into one. So to start with, they were running on separate rates systems. So all of that stuff will come into play through amalgamation. It'll have to be planned very, very well.
So I'd also like to add in that what your officers are going to do is, say you continue to focus on aquatic facilities, they are going to look at all the possible options within that service for what could be done to change it and present a series of options. It's not going to be limited to just the things that are on the spreadsheet. So, for example, in aquatic services, there's actually quite a lot in there. There's a lot that involve a lot of staff. There's a lot that also have user pays. So there will be a lot of options within that as a piece of work.
And our initial high-level thinking is that for the services that you select, we would look to describe what do we legally have to deliver, what do we currently deliver, monetize the two of them so that you can see what does it cost for us to deliver above and beyond what we legally required, and then present you kind of some enveloped options about, well, what would it look like if we delivered the service in this way? What could you save? But I don't think the intention is we just give you kind of a one and done option within each service. So I think we're expecting that you would like to see a number of options, but a real deep dive on those services in a way that is focused on service review. And I think to take the rubbish and recycling piece around some of that stuff is funded by the waste levy. But there's a whole lot of stuff that's not funded by the waste levy in there, aka our recycling service to some extent. But it might not, I think part of the lens across this work is, regardless of reform, what do you want our community to look like and what do you want delivered to community? And can we afford it, regardless of reform? And so I suppose we're not making an assumption that across all 5 of those services, it's we can't afford it. It's what do you want the community to receive?
And just one final comment for yours again. Remember from feels like a lifetime ago some of that conversation about stranded costs, and that actually some of the stranded costs relate to debt and buildings. So that in some of these activities, changing the service or say the hours that something is open doesn't actually make a material change to the cost of the service. If there's debt that needs to be serviced or there's building OPEX, then that takes up a large share of it. And within your rubbish and recycling service, there's a large chunk there that's debt. And your targeted rate currently helps cover that. So there's actually quite a lot to think about. And so I guess in summary here, I'd like to see you try and crunch that list down to 3, maybe 4 if you begged.
What I'm having a little heart attack about here, and I'm getting massive allergic reactions, probably anaphylactic reactions, is I really am scared that we're going down a path where we become a community or a council that functions technically but doesn't become a place that people want to come and live in and bring children up in and families in terms of where we want to go. And I really want us to keep that in mind, that we still have to function as a vibrant community that attracts people, that attracts other councils to us, and that people want to stay and live here.
I'm struggling to drop it down on the factors. I just don't think I have enough background information on stranded costs, on things like what impacts, particularly debt, and what we think is a small change is a big savings. So, yeah, that's where I'm struggling.
All right, any more feedback?
And I just want to say, I think it's important that in wanting to look at these, it's not necessarily about doing less. It's about other options to do it more efficiently. So it's it's like that. If you keep doing what you've done, you'll always get what you've always got. So it's not about reductions or anything like that. Some of it's about are there efficiencies that make it more relevant and things. So yeah.
Yep, yeah, you're right. And doing a deep enough dive into these will enable your officers to bring those options back. And if you keep all 5 there, then given everything else that's going on, they're going to struggle with it.
So I'm happy to indicate that rubbish and recycling is definitely on my radar. I know that we've had lots of briefing and information about potential changes to contracts and different stuff, and so it's an obvious one to do first. So I'm happy to put that out there and then test that with the table, whether we can just at least agree one for now and then move to through the ones.
I'm happy to let aquatic facilities be as they are, status quo, not look too deeply into those unless anyone else is.
In terms of actually, in following on for your comment, I think there is possibly room in aquatic facilities to privatise the way the aquatic lessons that are there or the land-based lessons. So I think there could be something you could look into that, which would take the pressure and the stress off council financially, still provide the service, but outsourcing that service.
Remembering, we're not saying don't do them. We're just prioritising the ones that will come back to you in July. The rest still stay on a list for this is an area that needs to be looked in, just not now.
I support Sam's rubbish and recycling. That for me is definitely a thing for me. Community development, I'm comfortable leaving it there, to be honest, because I don't think you can make huge savings or changes to the way that's run. It's not a massive budget line in terms of how we spend that, so I don't think it makes. And community facilities and services is definitely one, and possibly property. That's the other one that I would.
Yeah, I could live with those 3.
support those three also.
So sorry, just confirming, you guys are all saying the bottom three this time round, and then part 2 in a year's time or 2 years' time on aquatics and community development. Is that what everyone's saying? Is anyone disagreeing with that?
I can't quite see how we would unbuckle aquatic facilities and community facilities. I think we're applying the lens to look at this. I think we need to be looking at the opportunity across both platforms, though one may take a bigger hit than the other, and that's ultimately up to. But I think when we think about those are the two areas that we run and provide to our community at cost. Not cost, but both costs. That's what's costing the ratepayer. And I think if we're looking to keep rates down and meet a 4%, those are the areas of spend that we need to have a really clear lens on. And I'm happy to hear the argument as to how uncoupling those two work. But when I look at what we put through that budget line each year,
So the only counter argument would be, Clint, that with the aquatics, we are putting the capital investment possible capital investment through the strategic investment framework, and so I don't think we want to get ahead of that. So it could be that actually we're using the LTP to consult on and to have a conversation around what are we thinking in terms of capital investment, that then might actually mean that we're doing that aquatics kind of following that. I don't know, that's one thing I'm looking at Monique's face is whether, in terms of sequencing, whether that makes sense.
You might make some strategic decisions about how you provide services or how you would like to provide services, looking at the community facilities that then informs aquatic facilities that comes next.
My other thought around aquatics is we've just spent quite a bit of money reinvesting in that facility. I'd be keen to make sure that there's a reasonable return on that investment and continues at least for a little while.
Rubbish recycling, property, community facilities, services, and then we put aquatics and community development onto this list. Because these were the other ones that were identified.
Community infrastructure is parks and places and open spaces. In case you're wondering what community infrastructure is.
So these were identified as the later. They had less yeses or maybes against them than the others, which is why these were identified as later.
Now to argue against myself, maybe there is some merit in doing community infrastructure, community facilities, aquatics all along together, because it's actually about your total amenity offering, isn't it? But I don't know, that could be a weak argument.
That perhaps would be in that bucket if we didn't have to do everything else and respond to Head Start, then that would make excellent sense. A bit like, should we reform local government? Why? Yeah, starting there, yeah. Okay. Well done. We're now going to hand over. Yeah.
Oh, we're just going back, right. I wonder if I could just ask for a show of hands in terms of if you've ever watched the news and the government of the day has put out a policy and you think, but hang on a second, that doesn't align with that thing. Is there a show of hands around? Has anyone ever thought that there are policies that don't seem to work with each other? Right. So, What we're going to be looking at in June is how do we make sure that the ecosystems that we're setting up internally actually align with each other. And there are naturally some tensions in what's going on here. You can't, financial discipline and going for growth and even future fit, there are some natural tensions in there. So is to make sure that we get those settings as aligned and as complementary as we can. And that's will set you up well for Head Start. We might want to circle back around as we go through the actual policy writing in August or July and August beyond to see is there anything we specifically want to put in there. But I guess the work that we've been doing to date, those community outcomes, they're quite aspirational. I was very pleased to see the work that you did actually start to bring in the flavour of the strategic priorities you have. I can see it in there. It's been quite purposeful. So that alongside your strategic priorities, that actually tells us how we're going to prioritise our investment, how we're going to design and deliver the services, enable growth, manage infrastructure and respond to change over time. And I was quite interested that that fourth P has a lot of, priority setting already. I'm hearing around the table that the fourth P is actually quite important. So yes, those other ones are they are the outcomes, but that signals some investment and some change in the way that we're doing things for this LDP. So they become the decision lenses. So your community outcomes and your strategic priorities become the decision lens that we will put our financial strategy, our infrastructure strategy, and our policy settings, those key policies in the Local Government Act, we will actually line them up and see, is this actually delivering that intent? So the June workshops are intended to achieve two things. So these are broadly the headings for the three workshops. Yet to work out the dates. I do know that there's the 3rd, 10th and 17th, but we just need to figure out whether we're going to have all of the content ready at the right times. But they're intended to achieve two things. So firstly, to build a shared understanding around the table so that everyone has a consistent grounding in the key concepts and context. So ensuring nobody is left behind as we move into the more strategic discussions. So in addition to the strategy and policies as they stand now, I'm proposing that these will cover asset life cycle, depreciation, balanced budgets and debt. So if there are any other topics that you would like woven into these sessions from a general upskill and knowledge perspective, please email me and I'll incorporate them where I can, or if I can't incorporate them, I'll put them into a briefing session that we can roll into a regular sort of risk and assurance committee type training piece or a wider council piece. Secondly, the workshops will be designed to draw out governance direction. So much as we've done that today and in the earlier sessions with you on community outcomes, we'll be wanting to understand where are the trade-offs, where are those tensions, and what preferences are emerging from the emerging financial philosophy. And that financial philosophy statement will help underpin the financial strategy and the long-term plan budgeting approach. So, and the other thing I would really like to achieve is that out of those sessions, we get we clarify strategic priorities, and potentially we might even surface some of the modelling assumptions that we'll need to take into the budgeting work itself. So this is really just a teaser in terms of what's coming down the line, but I do want to impress on you that the community outcomes and the strategic priorities being woven together are absolutely critical and must talk to those policy settings. And
there is a little bit of work to do based on how we have these things right now. We have some gaps in our settings now, so there will need to be some changes. Okay.
Alison, two things immediately come to mind for me. One is the public-private split thing, and you know, so that's very much part of the community outcomes type of thing. And the other one is understanding more clearly the urban-rural rating systems and how they actually work together.
I have, so thank you, Mayor Bernie. I have listened very carefully when Monique has talked about the funding and financing of local government being completely broken. And some of this comes back to that wellbeing conversation in the room as well, not just the rural-urban split, etc. I've heard from Deputy Mayor Allen today about, you know, ability to pay, hearing about, you know, that fairness concept and equity and how we might incorporate that. And we do, as local government, we have that really important role in supporting community wellbeing. However, the financial tools, as Monique has alluded to previously, they're available to local government based primarily on a property-based rather than income-based system. So there is this whole need to focus on that sustainability, stewardship, resilience, fair allocation of costs in the way that we do things, but then put the pardon me for using the government's term, but put the backstops in to help that wellbeing and those other considerations around ability to pay, etc. That second workshop around who pays for what, when and why, one of the things that we'll be addressing through that is actually about how do we make the policies that we have right now more flexible and more agile, and that is our future fit mindset, but also that Head Start piece. So at the moment we have a very rigid revenue and financing policy with percentages around the public share and the private share and stuff. I would like to see that be looked at in a way that means that we're not going to have policy breaches if something comes in from left field. So yes, we still need to look at it. And the other thing is that that revenue and financing policy and your financial strategy and how that works together, the rating mechanisms that fall out of that, we need to be open to whether we want to look at changing that or whether that's something that's for a future year. Because right now, the agility in our rating system, the technical complexity of it is something that actually doesn't talk to that efficiency piece that the government is seeking. So there's a huge amount of work to do there. We need to determine when are we going to take that battle on, and you know, even some of the settings around enabling growth. You know, we need to have discussions. Do we want people to land bank? Is that a great thing? Because actually that means future development, or in which case we might think about, is land value therefore the right mechanism to have to encourage that behaviour? So there's a whole heap of philosophical conversations we'll have. I'm not sure that we're going to be up for the let's redesign our entire rating mechanism. However, you are going to breach your targeted uniform charged cap. So there will be some work we will need to do to change the rating mechanisms.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
If we could simplify it, we'd be happy.
Alison, in that workshop too, will that be part of the conversation, be around a working definition of affordability? Because, I mean, we could argue probably around this table what affordability means for the next 3 years, but like there needs to be some form of working definition
all
around
things
that.
We can discuss. This is all about you setting direction,
So
that come July, August, and I take all of the stuff that we've discussed and what you've unearthed and go, right, what might this therefore mean for a broader framework, and we'll work through it from there.
Because is the scope of also remissions, is that too low level in here, or our approach to remissions?
Well, it's actually a really good example. So recently I had to write a financial section into a development contributions hearing.
And it struck me that the development contributions policy is about growth paying for growth, yet in the middle of that policy we've got some social considerations, whereas actually you could have a remission or a grant process outside of your policy that is for things that you might want to address in terms of a wellbeing space. Same with remissions. We've got 17, I think it is, remission policies. That talks to the complexity of the rating system. If your rating system is easy enough for people to understand and follow, and it fits broadly in that property tax or, dare I say it, wealth space, then your remissions could be much smaller. But things like you've got a subdivision, for example, you've got a subdivision remission where, based on the caps that have been assigned by the council, there's no budget to provide that. And so are you really wanting to enable growth? It's those kinds of things, the kind of discussions we need to be having to actually go, is this lever working as we want it to?
Fantastic. We have our final slide, and because very conscious that you have another hui in 9 minutes, so just over to Karo.
Thank you. And we're just looking at the next steps and how the pieces that we've talked today will be presented back to you. So Alison's just talked about what's happening in June. What you will see in July, as Ashley and Dan talked about, is activity managers for those areas that you have talked about, that you have identified for now, will come back and present a range of options for you to discuss and consider. So we'll be busy behind the scenes in June, but immediately we come to our community conversation. So last week Lisa talked about our approach for going out for the community conversation. To start quickly, it'll be light touch, and we really want to provide some education about what the issues are and why we're having a conversation. The first section of that, we're going out, it'll be out through social media and through a webpage and a survey. The first part of the survey focuses on amalgamation, asking people whether they want to join with other councils, and if so, who, what are their concerns, what are key issues for them. We'll follow that with those top 2 lines of community outcomes to test those with the community and seek what's important to them as well. And we will also test those 3 key issues. We're thinking about changes to X. What do you think is important? Great. Does anybody have any questions or comments to add as we come to a close?
Maybe just to emphasise that in June, while Alison is taking you through our local government finance 101 to 107, and you're starting to give a signal around where you want to pull some levers in your financial strategy for the LTP, that's where Alison will be leading a lot of these conversations, because in the background, what Carol and Ashley will be doing is supporting our activity managers to be preparing those issues and options papers around those services that you've said you want to do a really deep dive on, to think about what service looks like into the future. And then that will come back to you in July.
And alongside all this work, we're going to be talking Head Start process, aren't we? I mean, I don't want to I'm just worried that we're going to conflate the two a little bit and want to keep them sort of separate, if that's okay.
And in terms of the amalgamation, how much are you going to talk about RMA reforms with the community as well, for those who may not have a clue about what that means and how that kind of intersects with each other?
In our initial education piece, we've got a landing page, which is you might remember, I think in Weekly Words a few weeks ago, I circulated a website that the team have put together that does a really high-level hotspot on all the reform programs that we're facing. So I don't think we're going to go deep on RMA reform with community, but we're definitely creating a space for people to learn more about that if they're keen.
and I'd be happy as a councillor to be able to help as much as possible in terms of that education. So please let me know what I can do within your framework, because I do have a lot of meetings outside around the table, and I'd love to be involved in that.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Everyone who's watching online, officers, councillors, well done. Thank you for bearing with me as your chair today. We'll just finish with our karakia. Kia whakatahia te tapu ke wati atiara ke tura ke whakatai ai ke tura ke whakatai ai au mie roie tai kia. Cool. We have a few minutes before we welcome in our visitors.